May 15th, 22XX. 10:34 a.m. in the Midoriya household. Midoriya Izuku was confused. By itself, that wasn't an uncommon occurrence. Being 4 years old, he had a naturally strong curiosity that frequently left him confused from day to day. Admittedly, this trait had caused him some difficulties already. Kakin would probably never let him forget that one time where he'd wanted to test whether bees could be tamed and leashed. They couldn't. However, this confusion was special with regard to its source not being some new phenomenon around him, but rather, Mommy, I'm jelly. Midoriya Inko was crying. By itself, that wasn't an uncommon occurrence. Being someone who naturally turned on the waterworks quite easily, she found herself crying frequently about anything sad or joyful. However, this crying was special in the way that its subject was not something she'd come across on a daily basis. After all, there's only one time your son manifests his quirk. And the fact that her Izuku basically looked like an enormous gummy bear did little to dampen her spirits. Izuku, she squealed, scooping up her son and spinning him around in excitement. That's wonderful. Her son blinked in puzzlement, looking slightly dizzy. His whole body, including his eyes and teeth, was vibrant green and slightly translucent, yet his clothing had remained unchanged. He inspected his hands unhappily. What's happening to me? Even his voice sounded a bit jelly-like, if such a thing was possible. I feel strange. Inko had to physically restrain herself from fully bursting into tears, just in case this substance reacted with water. Heaven forbid that she accidentally dissolved her Izuku out of excitement. Instead, she smiled and hoped that her smile contained even a fraction of the giddiness she felt right now. Everything is fine, sweetie. She crouched down and gently ran her fingers through his unruly, gelatinous curls. That has to be your quirk. Seldom had the face of her boy lit up like it did now. It made her heart go as light as a feather. I have my quirk, he exclaimed, elation accompanying understanding in the blink of an eye. Izuku was past excitement and joy and had arrived in the realms of pure and utter bliss. He had his quirk. He had his quirk. He had his quirk, and his 4-year-old mind was quick to draw the conclusion. Because obviously, having a quirk meant one thing. I can be a hero. Izuku jumped up and down, so full of energy, ready to take on the world, and let go of the sweet in his palm he'd been holding. Instantly, the green color vanished, and Izuku flopped onto the floor. Then his skin turned into bright, slightly grained wood. The exact wood that said floor was made of. Inko's eyes widened as she tried to process what had happened. What? Izuku. Her voice sounded even higher than before when she plucked her son from the floor and squeezed him tight, making him squeak. You know what? She said, determined. I'm booking an appointment with Dr. Tsubasa right now. Her face hurt from how wide her smile was, little flowers of joy blossoming in her heart to lift her spirit higher. Her son had not only gained a quirk, but an ability like this. Admittedly, she didn't fully understand it, nor could she trace it back to anyone in her family. It was bound to open hundreds of possibilities to her son. She was relieved. Izuku was a late bloomer. Most children in his kindergarten had already discovered their quirks, and she'd grown more and more anxious when nothing had happened. Her son finally activating his own was something she had wished for since the son of her longtime friend, Mitsuki, had developed his explosion quirk. Katsuki had, according to both his own mother and Izuku, become somewhat abrasive lately, viewing his peers as inferior due to being less powerful than him. Still, now that Izuku had a quirk himself, surely they would grow closer again. She also held the hope that maybe Izuku would be able to mellow the sweet, but slightly brash Katsuki a bit. Speaking of which, Izuku, practically bursting with pride and glee, had grabbed the phone. He obviously wanted to tell Kakin about his newfound ability. However, Inko had another idea. Izuku? Reluctantly, his son tore his eyes away from the screen. Inko held up his shoes. How about we go and visit Aunt Mitsuki and Kakin? Do you want to show them your quirk in person? Izuku's smile was as bright as the sun. 11:13 a.m. in the living room of the Bakugo household. And if I let go of it, I instantly get back to normal. Izuku proudly demonstrated his quirk using a cotton bag. I can do it in just a part of my body, too. That's pretty fucking great. Bakugo Katsuki's fiery eyes lit up. Can you do that with anything? Like, you think you could transform into a diamond? Izuku hesitantly nodded. Probably. So far I only did it with a waka waku and the floor. And the bag, of course. Said bag rested in his arms, looking every bit as unassuming as it was. Izuku concentrated and awaited the tickling but definitely not unpleasant sensation that came with the activation of his quirk. He had practiced during the drive, giddily giggling to himself while changing between cotton and jelly repeatedly. A moment after, his arms had taken on the exact same dark brown of the fabric they were holding. So, you emulate the molecular makeup of the material you touch and then reproduce it in your body? Mitsuki inquired. Izuku blinked. Laughing, she rephrased, your body becomes a copy of the material that you touch? The boy nodded excitedly. I think so, Annie. Well, I don't know yet if it's as strong as the original is, but… He pulled at his left arm, and it stretched slightly. I became cotton. Katsuki grinned, his eyes filled with fire. All right, Deku. Then you'll become my sidekick when I've got my own hero agency. Then you carry a diamond with you everywhere and get everyone out of a collapsing building while I kill the villains. You won't kill anyone, brat. Don't tell me what to do, old hag. Not in this tone. Shut your trap. I talk how I want to. Taken aback by the sudden change in the two Bakugos, with a resigned Masaru trying to reconcile them, Izuku whispered, Mommy, do you think they will change someday? Well, Inko answered hesitantly. I got to know Mitsuki at college, and she remained more or less the same over the years. Anyway, Deku, Katsuki continued as if he hadn't just shouted at his mother. I hereby demand you as my future sidekick. So from today on, we'll prepare for our hero routine. Okay, Kaken. Izuku agreed, eyes sparkling with admiration. He felt nearly overwhelmed by Katsuki's change in demeanor. The way he was looking at him, and suddenly saw more than just the useless Deku. Looking at him with something like appreciation, looking at him exactly the way he'd always wished him to. Boys, Inko cautiously interrupted, don't you think it's a bit early too? Oh, come on, Inko. Don't be such a spoilsport, Mitsuki chided good-naturedly. Well, as good-naturedly as Bakugo Mitsuki could get. Besides, it's not as if they'd listen to you right now. True, Katsuki had already started to drag Izuku towards his room, announcing that they'd now think up one hell of a training regimen. And don't be such a crybaby, Deku. Inko, suddenly quite tired, rubbed her face. I can't escape the feeling that this won't end well. Masaru seemed inclined to agree with her. Ah, rubbish, Mitsuki said dismissively. Don't you remember the bee incident? They quickly stopped making leashes after Izuku came home looking like a bubonic plague sufferer, didn't they? The blonde woman grinned. And besides, Katsuki's so fixated on being a hero, I'd be a fool to try and stop him. Yes, but Izuku, he discovered his quirk barely an hour ago, for heaven's sake. Inko looked at her friend with worry in her eyes. And it seems fitting for hero work, you know? It's a quirk that suits him and his dreams. And now they want to do a training regimen? They're 4, and have somewhat naive imaginations about how hero business works, and… No, Mitsuki said in a tight voice. Inko, they are young. Okay, granted. But, well, you probably did notice that Katsuki started to rebel against me? Her dry tone could have come off as funny, but Mitsuki's tense posture bespoke her seriousness. He's dead set on becoming a hero, and really, why should I discourage him? I wouldn't be able to. The little fucker is as stubborn as they come. Inko, I know you view the whole hero business somewhat skeptically, but at least in this regard you should try not to patronize Izuku. Let him make his own decisions. Seeing Inko's hesitance, her expression softened. I'd never insinuate that you don't want the best for Izuku, Inko. I really wouldn't. But if it turns out that this really is his dream, then don't sway him away from it. Support him. Push him, if he starts slacking off. Well, that's what I'd do anyways. She grinned before continuing, sounding a bit wistful. And I saw that look on his face, too. Every time he starts rambling about heroes, he just looks so fucking happy. When he scrawls his notes in that little notebook Katsuki bought him, so he would stop plastering his room with these fucking post-its. That was so adorable, Inko. I wonder where Katsuki got that foul language, though. Inko wisely kept her mouth shut, but Mitsuki did have a point with what she was saying, as much as the worried mother in her wanted to prove her wrong. Anyway, I guess what I wanted to say is that if he sets his sights high, then don't make him look at the ground. Buy him some climbing gear and encourage him with everything you've got. Mitsuki laughed. Who'd have thought it? I actually did a metaphor. So stop being a worrywart and get yourself some nachos. Inko glanced at the crisps bowl and took a few, though she was careful to avoid the salsa. With the Bakugo family's taste for spicy food, it'd probably be extract from some exotic chili breed she had never heard of and likely wouldn't want to become acquainted with more closely. Not that the precaution measure would have achieved anything, as the unfortunate Inko learned that the salsa was not the spicy component this time. The nachos were. Upstairs, in Katsuki's room. All right, so at 9 in the morning, we both meet at that big cherry tree near the woods, Katsuki summarized, scribbling a crooked timetable on his board. The blonde boy had donned a military-style cap and black sunglasses, thoroughly enjoying his role as Sergeant K. We can take the 2 extras with us, Fingers and Wings, though they're hardly hero material. Maybe we should take in one of them as secretary later on. Katsuki laughed. You know, Izuku objected tentatively, they do have names. Do they? Katsuki made a point of exhibiting his disinterest. I never bothered to learn them. Come on, Kakin. That's mean. Oh, please, he drawled. Fingers got as much character as you'd expect from someone with a quirk like his, and Wings would be much more interesting if he wasn't so fat that he can barely fly. Now stop being such a Deku. With that topic resolved, in a Bakugo-esque fashion, they continued fine-tuning Katsuki's homicidal exercise routine of explosion suffering or hero's plan, which had Izuku vibrating in excitement. Actually, excitement was an understatement. Izuku was delirious with joy. Not only did he get his quirk, he had a hard time restraining himself from starting to analyze it here and now, but it actually seemed really cool. Changing his body to things he touched was something he hadn't heard of before at all. And, most importantly, and the main source of his happiness, his relationship with Katsuki was restored practically overnight, which was something he'd never have dared dreaming of. And he genuinely seemed interested in his quirk. There was no sign of the conceited, bully-like Bakugo. He was almost acting like he did before his explosion quirk manifested. And after that, we also have to work on our quirks, Katsuki announced, scrawling quirk training in 3 of the 6 afternoon columns. When's your doctor's appointment? It shouldn't be long until it's due, Izuku explained, trying to remember his mother's exact words. Tomorrow, or in 2 days, I think. Mommy said the doctor was curious about my quirk, since it's mutated or something. All right, Deku, you better tell me what you got from your appointment so we can plan our quirk training, Bakugo insisted. But we'll start physical training tomorrow anyway, understood? Izuku nodded fiercely. Good, because we both want to go to UA, don't we? Katsuki proclaimed boldly. Yes, Izuku squealed, on the brink of tears once more. But seriously, quit being such a fucking crybaby, Deku. It's a pain in the ass to deal with. May 16th, 22XX. 1:12 p.m. in Dr. Tsubasa's office. Peculiar, Dr. Tsubasa muttered, flipping through the files that contained the results of Izuku's quirk examination. Utterly peculiar. Excuse me, Tsubasa-san, Inko interjected. What exactly do you mean by peculiar? There isn't anything wrong with Izuku, is there? No, nothing like that, assured the doctor. On the contrary, actually. He put the files down and looked at his visitors through thick goggles. Your son developed what is commonly known as a quirk mutation. You are familiar with that term, I presume? Inko hesitated. Roughly, but could you maybe? Of course. Tsubasa gave a polite smile. Surely you know, he began, that commonly a quirk will manifest as a version of one of their parents' quirk or as a combination of both. The quirks of the grandparents can play in, as quirk inheritance runs in accordance with Mendelian genetics. But this mutation is, well, different. Your son's genes didn't seem to care much about how quirks commonly manifest. The doctor shrugged for emphasis before elaborating. He seems to be one of those odd cases you get sometimes. This, he held up one of his files, is your family's genealogy, quirk registry included. Protuberance, heat transmission, pull, uproar. I could go on for some time. However, None of the quirks in here fit his in the slightest. He tapped his chin, proceeding on the assumption that you were faithful to your husband. Inko's expression darkened rapidly, and the doctor quickly backtracked. I didn't mean to insinuate anything, Midoriya-san. My task only concerns clarification. Inko nodded, lips pressed together. Tsubasa continued, choosing his words very carefully. Well, proceeding on that assumption, I would conclude that your son developed a completely original quirk, one that's not related to the rest of your family at all. He is, for a lack of a better word, unprecedented. But what exactly can I do with my quirk? Izuku eagerly asked. Can I become a hero with it? He really needed to know as much as possible about this. After all, one's quirk was one of the most important things in their life, and if you wanted to make the most of it, you had to know it backwards, simple as that. He swung his legs under the chair nervously. Well, let me explain, said Tsubasa. To be honest, this was one of the more interesting cases he had come across over the last few years, so he was content to take his time. Based on your examination, we can conclude that your quirk is a transformation-based type that enables your body to adopt the molecular makeup of anything you touch, with the exception being living things. For example, you could adopt the material of a wooden chair, but not that of a tree that's still living. Izuku nodded hesitantly. He didn't completely understand everything the doctor said, but he guessed he got the core idea. Furthermore, the effect of your quirk is affected to some extent by the state the material is in. To some extent, Izuku parroted. Tsubasa seemed to be up to something. Well, said the doctor, that is, actually, the second reason why I think of your quirk as peculiar. You see, when I gave you a marble made out of tungsten and told you to activate your power, your whole body turned into solid, immaculate tungsten even though the marble actually had a hidden streak of rubber on it. Basically, you were focused on adapting a metal and your quirk reacted to it. The rubber was assessed as unfit and therefore left out, even though you didn't know there was a rubber streak on it, or that the marble was made out of tungsten. Izuku felt pretty overwhelmed, but tried to remember as much as possible of what the doctor said. He should have thought of bringing the notebook Kaken gave him. Izuku swore to carry it with him all the time from now on. Thoughts were so much easier to contain on paper than having them all pent up in his head. While he couldn't have possibly guessed about it at this point in time, that vow laid the foundation of what would later become one of the standard works of quirk theory, a small library's worth of quirk studies, strategy patterns, costume designs, gadget ideas, and other hero-related analysis, all neatly sorted in dozens of notebooks by content, date, and utility. At that moment, though, Izuku, who didn't yet have the faintest idea of this oeuvre pro heroes would one day pay vast sums to study, felt proud. Proud, because his quirk hadn't just aroused attention, it was peculiar. It was a quirk the doctor saw fit to praise. A quirk that just had to be suitable for hero work. Izuku would listen carefully. But, Tsubasa continued, unaware of Izuku's thoughts, when I gave you a handful of sand, something unusual happened. After what you displayed before, I expected you to turn into a big block of quartz, which is what sand consists of. However, instead your whole body turned into living sand. Little grains. Inko looked at him in confusion. Do you mean? It seems as if you, to some degree, were able to influence what state you would transform into. Tsubasa explained carefully. Presumably it has to do something with your subconscious and knowledge, though this is something you should look into with a specialist. My best guess is that you saw metal as something singular. Therefore the condition you turned into was a consistent, singular one, too. The sand, though, you likely saw as an amorphous mass, so the condition you turned into was one that matched that idea. If your quirk really does work that way, I would advise you to pursue studies in science. Izuku didn't understand what exactly that meant. He'd have to ask his mother after the appointment was over. Tsubasa continued, I would recommend you to experiment with your quirk, but, he added, seeing Izuku's face light up with excitement, you must be careful, extremely so. Do not attempt anything that has to do with liquids or, perish the thought, gases, before you are at the very least 13 years old and, most importantly, well informed in chemistry and physics and under capable supervision. Otherwise, you might well risk rendering yourself incapable of reassembling your body. It would be unfortunate to lose someone with your potential. Izuku nodded, a little intimidated. I can, though, Tsubasa offered, much more pleasantly, give you the addresses of some capable counselors who are better equipped to deal with such an uncommon quirk than me. What do you say? Izuku nodded without hesitating. Inko felt much more subdued, but agreed after looking at her son's determined expression. May 18th, 22XX. 8:56 a.m. at the big cherry tree near the woods. About time you showed up, Deku. Even though Katsuki seemed as combative as ever, there was little real menace in his voice. He looked just as excited to start the heroes as Izuku was, and, to the green-haired boy's amazement, had brought some supplies with him. Kaken, what's that? Izuku asked without answering the blonde's greeting. Katsuki was obviously eager to show off, and Izuku knew better than wasting time when he was about to preen. And it seemed as if it was perfectly justified, because hanging from one of the lower branches of the cherry tree. Is that a punching bag? Izuku was positively flabbergasted. How in the world did he talk Aunt Mitsuki into buying a punching bag like that? Well, duh, Katsuki answered with obvious satisfaction at Izuku's reaction. I mean, if we want to be heroes, we'll need to get our bodies in shape. Just look at yourself, Deku. Izuku pouted, but he knew quite well that no person with functioning eyes would ever describe him as wiry, let alone muscular. Okay, Kaken, and what exactly is that? He nodded to the long rod Katsuki held in his right hand. That's my motivational tool, Deku, he stated in his iasynthetotobvious voice. Did you try to motivate Yubi and Tsubasa with that? Izuku asked, somewhat anxiously. Katsuki remained silent, though his grin was much wider. August 16th, 22XX, for years after Heroes started. 2:44 p.m. at Utapao Primary School. Midoriya Izuku was bored. It wasn't that he hated primary school or didn't understand why he was there. He knew everyone had to learn the basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and he finished his tasks both dutifully and precisely. But honestly, sometimes school seemed really disappointing to him. Most of the other kids were so slow. He didn't blame them for it. He knew different people had different thought speeds, but that didn't mean it had to be to his liking. Well, there were some exceptions. Kaken was great as always, and even better in ignoring the tedium that filled the class after lunch break at the latest. There were also a quiet boy with some sort of fume quirk and a girl with blue-dotted skin who were pretty smart and appeared as bored as Izuku was. But apart from that, well, suffice it to say that Izuku didn't have all that many social contacts. Now you take these 5 cupcakes over here and subtract. Izuku unwound as the teacher turned math class into nap time. He knew he might regret not paying closer attention later on and genuinely tried to stay aware, but with just 10 minutes left before heading to the cherry tree to start quirk training with Kaken, he had quite the hard time staying focused, especially after indulging in an online forum about All Might yesterday. The one he chatted with apparently didn't need any sleep at all. As a result, it had been far past the scheduled time when he'd finally gotten to bed. Midoriya? Midoriya? May I at least ask you to keep up a pretense of awareness? The teacher stood right before his desk and tried to get his attention. Izuku yelped and flung back into his chair, bolt upright. Yais, Sato-sensei, he exclaimed. The class dissolved into giggles. Saito Inamuri sighed, feeling too old for this job. Way too old. All right then, since most of you barely seem to be able to focus on my presence, let alone my words, and considering that classes will end in a few minutes either way, consider this a free period. Just be quiet. With that said, he slumped over. Maybe he should ask his cousin Shota how he managed to keep his class under control when he wanted to take a nap. When it became apparent that their teacher was not going to wake in the foreseeable future, the students started chatting quietly. Izuku took out hero analysis for the future in R5 and started comparing the fighting styles of Best Jeanist and Edgeshot. He really wondered how Best Jeanist would fare against an opponent who fought in armor. He couldn't recall any incidents where something akin to that had occurred, but he noted it down anyway as a potential weakness of Fiber Master. For that matter, why had no one thought of this before? No fibers, no attacking points. On the other hand, maybe it was just difficult to get your hands on an actual armor nowadays. What exactly were the properties a material had to fulfill in order to count as fiber? Could Best Genus capture someone like Edgeshot if the latter had his quirk activated? If yes, that'd mean that Fiber Master was able to influence fibers already affected by a matter-changing quirk. In that case, he could theoretically. Oi, Deku, you started word vomiting again. Shut it. When Midoriya looked up, the room was nearly empty, except for 3 worried-looking kids, a still sleeping Saito, and Kakin, you startled me. Well, I'd say I'm sorry, but I'm not. Now get your ass in gear and… Katsuki looked at the bystanders in irritation. What the hell are you doing here, extras? Piss off. The trio shot him a glare, but left nonetheless. After 2 years in the same class, most people had learned not to provoke Bakugo. Midoriya was only able to mellow him to some extent. You know, Kakin, Izuku reprimanded during their walk to the cherry tree. You really should try and break that habit of calling other people extras. They didn't even do anything. Exactly. Katsuki laughed. Not doing anything is just what makes an extra an extra. Izuku sighed. While Katsuki had mostly stopped getting physical, unless provoked, he seriously doubted there was anything that could be done to cure him from his foul mouth. Anyway, Katsuki proceeded as if he hadn't been interrupted. Today, we're going to focus on your defense. You're still way too slow when it comes to adapting at single spots. Yeah, Izuku admitted somewhat sheepishly. But it's difficult to exactly focus the transformation instead of doing it throughout my body. Oh, difficult, Katsuki snorted. If it's too difficult for you to get some damn iron onto your noggin, you can still quit. Besides, he continued, as Izuku wanted to object, your quirk won't be of much use if you can only transform into one material at a time. Izuku wanted to answer, but was distracted by a commotion down the street. Izuku's hero radar deflected. That was definitely a pro-hero on patrol. Hey, Kakin, let's look who's over there. Maybe we'll get an autograph. Oh, come on, Katsuki grumbled. You don't even know if it's a fucking hero in the first place. However, he still followed the suddenly quite awake Izuku towards the crowd, reluctant as he was. Oh, it's the bamboo hero, Bamboo Grove. An aspiring hero who saved 14 people during the Balewind incident. Real name, Takeshita Yasashi. Ranking, in the high 600s of the Japanese hero Billboard chart. Favorite food, yakisoba. Graduated from Isamu High at age 17. Currently residing in… Oh, shut it, Deku. Katsuki hissed. You're seriously starting to freak me out. Let's just get your shitty autograph and… Izuku, with the one-track mind of a hero enthusiast, had already started barging his way through the crowd. He came to a stop in front of the hero, who wore a bamboo-themed costume, including bamboo bracers and 2 swords with hilts made of bamboo, bamboo stalks over the ears, and a belt with bamboo-like segments. Excuse me, Bamboo Grove-san? He asked and hesitated. The hero smiled amiably. An autograph, huh? Izuku nodded timidly. Katsuki had to pull himself together to not start laughing at his abrupt change in demeanor. In my notebook, please? He opened the book and skimmed through the pages until he'd found the one about Bamboo Grove. The hero's eyes widened when he saw the detailed notes this boy, who he was pretty sure wasn't even 10 years old, had made about him. You did all this on your own? He asked, flummoxed. Another nod. Then Bamboo Grove gave a high, clear laugh. You're a fanboy, huh? He asked genially and took out a pencil, made of bamboo, of course. Well, if you took so many notes on a small-scale hero like me, who am I to deny you an autograph? Izuku beamed as he saw Bamboo Grove's signature right next to his sketch of the hero. You know, you seem to have the right mindset for hero work, Grove stated. Well, good luck anyway. And remember to be on guard. After all, we're still searching for an escaped villain. He grinned. Roughly 5 minutes after Katsuki had managed it to tug Izuku away from the patrolling hero, he commented dryly, You still didn't get rid of this tick of yours to start transforming yourself when you're happy, did you? Izuku looked down at his body and realized he had taken on a bright red. Not the natural shade he took on if he was embarrassed, but the exact same red as his shirt. Izuku squeaked and changed back to default mode. I didn't do this in front of Bamboo Grove, did I? Katsuki just laughed. Deku had started with that shortly after Grove had said Izuku was hero material, but not with his face. That he'd done after their departure. Not that he planned on telling Deku any of that. When they arrived at the cherry tree, Katsuki fetched 3 rings from his pocket, one being made of rubber, one of wood, and one of iron. Alright, Deku, so here it goes. Today's starting condition is wood. Metal for explosions, rubber for the rod. Questions? Izuku just slipped on the rings and shook his head, expression determined. Katsuki gave him a feral grin, and Izuku had barely time to transform his right arm into metal before a barrage of explosions shook him to the core and left an unpleasant tingling between his ears. Then he quickly adapted rubber in his chest, just in time for the rod stroke, and started to match Katsuki's movements in quick succession, fully concentrated on the material of the 3 rings and adapting as fast and precisely as he could manage. An explosion to metal, and back to wood, as soon as it was over. His shin to rubber, his left hip to metal, right hip to rubber, left to wood. Then his shoulder to rubber, his wrist, too, a tad too slow. Izuku hissed in annoyance when the rod hit his wooden joint right before he could transform it, but quickly shook it off. Katsuki wouldn't stop just because of one mistake. 2 successive explosions, right elbow and left side, a quick stab with the rod towards his stomach, metal, metal, rubber, back to wood. A kick to the thigh, wooden default. A sharp whip with the rod towards his neck, rubber, quickly. A swift explosion too. Kakin, not the face. We had that. TSK, Kakin breathed heavily, dropping the rod while unleashing a salvo of punches, some accompanied by explosions, some without. On the bright side, Izuku didn't have to worry about transforming into rubber. Cold comfort, though. It was more than compensated by the problem that his respawn time was suddenly cut in half, as he was to only transform into iron to absorb explosions, not for normal punches. Kakin became faster and faster, making it more and more difficult to toggle between iron and wood, until… boom. Groaning, Izuku sat up, only to be intercepted by an obnoxiously mean headache. 6 minutes and 44 seconds, Katsuki panted, looking at his wristwatch. Could have been worse. Izuku was proud of his effort, since Katsuki not criticizing something about his form was a rare experience. He himself tried to readjust his throbbing head while simultaneously blending out the upcoming repercussion effects. This sort of intensive training made him suffer the drawback of his quirk much earlier. His body had already started to ache slightly, though thankfully it kept within limits for the present time. Apparently, this effect was caused by his body cells having trouble adjusting themselves to constant reshaping, which led to microinjuries similar to muscle soreness in his whole body, all at once. It spared his vital organs, which he was quite grateful for. Oi, Deku, get the fuck up, will you? We've got to catch up cause of your fanboying earlier, so don't conk out now. Izuku sighed, got back onto his feet, and took a swig from his water bottle. As soon as he'd regained at least some of his focus, they both adopted fighting stances and started going through basic katas. Katsuki had joined a karate club, which clashed with Izuku's quirk counseling appointment/science class. He was currently trying to beat some techniques into Izuku, often quite literally. No, Deku, damn it. Katsuki erupted. Do you want to suck at this, or are you really that stupid? Your left arm isn't a club. Now stop fucking around. Be more focused. Like this. Katsuki yanked Izuku's arm strictly forward, then snapping, and your legs have to be stable, too. If you glue your feet together like that, there's no way in hell you wouldn't fall over if someone shoved you. He demonstrated that by pushing Izuku in the back, causing him to stumble until he'd regained foothold. See? Katsuki asked smugly. After an hour filled with more katas, reps, 2 sparring matches that Katsuki dominated even though Izuku managed to get the better of him as soon as he ceased his efforts, running, interval training, and another session with the 3 rings, both of them were exhausted beyond measure. You know what, Deku? Katsuki said between huffs. You were getting better at this. When we got started, you were a lot less. I can imagine what you want to say, Izuku answered wearily. Do you want to come over today? We're having Katsudon. Of course you have, Katsuki scoffed. It's a miracle you don't completely consist of the stuff already. Maybe I am, Midoriya teased, and I'm just constantly transformed. Katsuki smirked. Yeah, well, whatever. Let's go. Can't say your mother doesn't know how to make the stuff, after all. As they headed towards the Midoriya apartment, chattering about possible hero names for them. Katsuki despised the idea of all matter and said that Izuku should quit being such a fucking copycat. They were completely unaware of what fate had in store for them on that day. 16th of August, 20XX. 5:34 p.m. in a side alley near Tatooine Station. Ayu, who were you again? One sentence. One little sentence that kept replaying and replaying in his head as he walked down the street, paying only marginal attention to his surroundings. Who were you again? Numb, apathetic, indifferent, the asphalt under his feet and the walls lining the lane becoming little more than random objects, perceived without being processed, empty husks devoid of any significance. Who were you again? Yes, who was he? What was left of him? Who were you again? What meaning did his existence hold after all this time? What had he left? Who were you again? Had he really just forgotten about everything? About his ideals, his aspirations? Who were you again? About the dream he once cherished? Who were you again? He, who had once vowed to become a man so great that his name would appear in textbooks. Who were you again? Was there truly nothing left for him but growing old, full of bitterness, remorse, and regrets? Who were you? Then came the scream. A few minutes earlier. What? What's wrong about Nitro Kill? Short and to the point. Izuku chuckled, drawing a glare from Katsuki. Well, your hero name should be a beacon of hope to those who are hopeless, a beacon of power to those who are powerless, and a source of fear to those who wish others harm. Katsuki shot him an irritated look. The fuck? All Might said that in an interview, Izuku admitted, as if Katsuki didn't know that it had been the interview from January 9th, 8 years ago, when he'd just won against Dantalian Circle in Shinjuku, and been interviewed on his thoughts about symbolism in names by Ava Ridge. And, don't you think that Nitro Kill overdoes it with the source of fear part a bit? TSK. Just because some sissies get whatever Katsuki had wanted to say beforehand slipped from his mind when they rounded the corner. In the middle of the alleyway stood a person they'd seen in the news flash this very morning, a person whose photo had featured a caption. Dangerous individual. His coarse-board skin was an unnaturally bright yellow, and every word he spoke revealed a flash of pale flavescent teeth. A tuft of grassy hair sprouted from his head, and hints of a heavily muscular build showed through his beige trench coat. He didn't look suspicious at all. The man had been talking to somebody at the phone, but as soon as the words had slipped from Katsuki's mouth, the villain turned around. Well, look what the cat dragged in, he said with a strangely squeaky voice that was at odds with his masculine appearance. I'll call you back later, okay? No problems. Just some brats who walked in on me. He shut his phone and smiled yellowly. All right, kiddies. I'm sorry, but it's impolite to walk in on people when they're on the phone, right? No, this couldn't be happening. Of all the streets in Mizutofu, the escapee had to cross their path. The odds for that bordered on non-existent. So why? Why? Who the hell are you? Katsuki demanded, but Izuku knew he was bluffing. They'd seen him on TV together. And apparently, the villain had, too, because he snapped, "Don't get coy, now." It was all over the news, wasn't it? Though, I have to admit it's quite satisfying to know that people will not forget the name of the villain Lime that soon. The man looked at them, his eyes flashing danger. So don't lie to me. Boy, I could burn your face off in a single. Lime? Izuku asked. But that name doesn't inspire fear at all. He shut his mouth with a click as he realized what he'd just blurted out. Deku, said Katsuki with an eerie calm. Sometimes I wonder how someone with your brains could possibly manage to be such a fucking idiot. The villain rushed in and Izuku screamed, changing into rubber as he remembered the rings he'd forgotten to take off after training. Lime punched him square in the face and sent him flying backwards, crashing into the wall. Through surprise and pain, Izuku noted that some sort of liquid soaked through his clothes, making them give off fumes. Die! Katsuki bellowed while Lime was occupied. The surprised villain wheeled around, only to be met by an explosion to the gut. He staggered backwards, a strange smirk on his face. A moment later, Katsuki screamed in pain as his hands lit up in a torrid, burning, crippling pain. Horrified, he watched as the skin on his palms started to disintegrate. Air. What? Interesting, isn't it? Lime asked, seemingly amused despite the smoking hole in his trench coat. My quirk is a plant-based one, called lemon. Among other things, it enables me to emit highly concentrated citric acid, which leads to the result you can observe right now. Unfortunately, citric acid does not dissolve certain substances, which is why your little rubber friend has gotten out unscathed, meaning I'll have to finish him. Leave Kakin alone. Izuku punched the villain with a fist of iron, making the man hiss in annoyance. You are a pesky little brat, aren't you? Too bad you're too weak to deal any actual damage, aren't you? With that, he casually backhanded Izuku, which left him reeling, then followed up with a powerful punch to the stomach that left him on all fours, gasping for breath. Lime then advanced on Katsuki, who was writhing in pain, oblivious to his surroundings. His world was filled with pain, with terrible, mind-breaking, nerve-searing anguish as his hands split open in front of his eyes. In a single swift motion, the villain reached down and grabbed him by the head in an iron grip. I recommend you don't try anything foolish now, boy, Lime said conversationally. Otherwise, I might have to. Go to hell. Lime's arm jerked upwards as Katsuki hit it from below. The boy then backed off as the irate villain delivered a kick towards the point where he'd stood moments earlier. Lime wasn't in the mood for games anymore. He didn't have much time left before a hero on patrol would be on location, especially after the boy's screams. He'd have to finish this quickly. You know, he said with a frosty smile, quite a number of lemon trees actually has thorns. Funny, is it not? From his hands arose two arm-length wooden batons, crooked and gnarled, but covered in dangerous-looking spikes. A cantha strike. Faster than they could comprehend, Lime was between the two boys, bringing the rods down on them without hesitation. Clang. Boom. To say that the three were surprised would be an understatement. Izuku had reflexively changed the top of his head into metal. Katsuki had shielded himself with an explosion, but it hurt. Fuck him. It hurt. His blood boiled, his skin flared. Blood dripped from his hands. A good portion of epidermis dissolved. You are quite the obnoxious brats, aren't you? Lime sighed, and the fight continued. Izuku and Katsuki were defending themselves to the best of their abilities, moving in sync like they'd practiced. No move was wasted, no words spoken. They fought with everything they had. But, in the end, they were still just children, were still just 9 years old, not to mention wounded and exhausted from their previous training. And Lime was an experienced fighter, driven into a corner. The fight barely lasted half a minute. After that, two boys laid on their backs, constrained by spiky vines and barely conscious. Lime stood on top of them, his hands dripping with acid. Now, Rubber Runt, you be nice and transform back, otherwise I will have to burn your little friend's eyes out. Be a good boy and... Suddenly, the villain was yanked back from the kids, and a voice declared, "Gently sandwich." With that, the villain suddenly found himself suppressed by an immense load, weighing him down like a pile of rocks, except that it seemed as if it was nothing but air that was nevertheless pushing him to the ground. Sandwiches are supposed to be light and refined foods. As much as I dislike piling that many layers on it, I concede that it was necessary. Everyone in the small alley looked at the young man with silver hair who had seemingly appeared out of thin air and had somehow managed to subdue the anguished-looking Lime who had started to secrete a small puddle of acid around himself. I must ask you to cease your efforts immediately, the man chided, as the pavement slowly started to corrode, which didn't sit right with Izuku's image of citric acid at all. While I am not fond of violence, I will not hesitate to take action should you decide to push your luck. Are you a hero? Asked Izuku. Please, Kakin is injured in. I'm afraid I am no hero, the man interrupted. Actually, I am not even sure why I intervened. How strange. Katsuki grimaced in pain along with Lime. Apparently, the citric acid had started to affect the villain's own skin by now. The man startled from his reverie and began to remove the vines from the boys' bodies. He simply did that by pulling on them, making them stretch as if made of rubber. After they were freed, he explained, Takeshita should be here soon. He will make sure you receive medical attention. But why aren't you a hero, mister? Izuku himself didn't know why he asked that question instead of worrying about Kakin, thanking their savior, or freaking out about being attacked by a villain. He really didn't. But the man stiffened as soon as it had left his mouth. I'm afraid it's because the man hesitated. I'm simply not cut out for the profession. I had a chance at it once, but I failed. Nothing more. Danjuro really tried not to sound bitter in front of the small boy before him, but after what Takeshita had said, who were you again? You prevented the hero from executing the rescue. At this point, I have to recommend you drop out altogether. No, stop. He simply could not afford to wallow in self-pity now. He'd saved these two boys in a truly gentlemanly fashion, had he not? Therefore, he needed to ensure that they were doing well. He shook his head to push aside the memories and got to work. He used his trusted handkerchief to carefully dab at the green-haired boy's face, as well as the other one's hands. He had to act quickly. The heroes would arrive any moment now, and he would be in trouble if he was found at scene. That he knew. He had used his quirk against a citizen without being licensed to do so again, so he'd have to make his exit soon. But then the second boy, the blonde one, said something that truly blindsided him. Well, you better try again then. Katsuki had been quiet for an unusually long time, and his voice was subdued as he spoke. You got this fucker in a single strike, and he was enough of a threat to appear in the news. So you better. He looked at him, his expression bordering on furious. So you better become a hero, damn it. What's wrong with you? Not cut out for the profession, my ass. Of course, Izuku then realized. Katsuki was frustrated. He aspired to become not just a great hero, but the greatest, yet all he'd gotten from the fight were spike wounds and shredded skin, while the man who'd taken him out in a single blow proclaimed himself lacking. I am afraid I must depart now. The villain has lost consciousness, but even if he had not, he still would not be in any condition to pose a danger to you. Contradictory to his distant words, Danjuro was deeply shaken. He had sworn to himself years ago to never hope again. He had been ready to fall into despair after realizing Takeshita had forgotten him. It would have been the final push, he was sure of that. And yet, those two little boys looked up to him, their eyes shining with the same light that used to fill Danjuro's own upon seeing a hero. The first one fiery and defiant, the second one awestruck and filled with determination. Could he really allow himself to give his dream another try? Could he? What's your name? Izuku blurted out. At least that much he needed to know. Memories, suddenly much more vivid and less melancholy. A tiny smile crept on his face. Call me. Gentle. Simultaneously, in another place. The door collapsed into a puddle of molten metal, opening the registry to the intruder. The cannon fodder had fulfilled its purpose and lured the heroes away from the registry. Now was the time for swiftness. Smiling and humming a merry little tune, the trespasser glanced around the gigantic room, divided by dozens of racks filled with file cabinets. Swiftly, she crossed the room and scoured the cabinets. Quickly there. Delight rushed through her body. She could feel it, hot and burning like magma under her skin. She paused. The cabinet in front of her did not differ from any of the surrounding ones in any remarkable way, but she knew she was right. Still smiling, she sorted through the files, her nimble talons only brushing each one before moving on to the next, until finally, yes. There it was, right in front of her. Her mood soared like that of a small child who had gotten her Christmas presents early. She couldn't hold it back any longer. She threw back her head and laughed. She laughed stridently and without restraint, bright and giddy while the heat finally broke out of her skin, instantly alighting all the surrounding racks in flaming hot beauty and incinerating everything but the file in her talons. The intruder left, setting the shelves ablaze left and right, all the while shrieking with laughter until she arrived at the building's roof, where the concrete sizzled under her touch. She forced the heat to settle down. She'd have little use for the file if someone noticed her now, and locked the blaze in her body. Then, she spread her wings and flew into the clear blue sky. August 16th, 23XX. 6:23 p.m. in Muzutafu General Hospital, room A217. Izuku, the famed Midoriya waterworks on full display. Midoriya Inko came rushing into the hospital room and made a beeline for her son. After having gotten a phone call from a policeman who'd told her that her son had been involved in a villain attack, She'd been scared. No, scratch that. She'd been terrified. For Izuku. For Katsuki, she'd been terrified at the prospect of what the villain might have done to them. Her mind had come up with dozens of scenarios, each one more horrifying than the previous one, each one prompting her to hit the gas pedal just the tiniest bit faster as she'd made her way through the evening rush. Hour as far as possible. She couldn't remember a single thing about the drive itself, had been too busy trying not to panic and let the last vestiges of self-control slip, trying to keep the pictures out of her mind. The scene that greeted her after she'd finally managed to get past the front desk nurse, scrambling upstairs and begging to all the entities that came to mind not to do this to her, and at last burst through the door, dreading what she'd find. The scene had been almost surreal in its serenity. Izuku, whole, healthy, bright-eyed. Izuku sat in a chair, greeting her with a smile that, to Inko, looked more beautiful than all the world. Next to him was a grumpy-looking Katsuki who was seated in a bed, making it abundantly clear to everyone that there were a million places where he'd rather be in this moment, and who unsuccessfully tried to conceal the smile that lit up his face when he saw her. It was so blissfully normal that it made Inko's heart flutter with relief. Her son, the center of her life, her son was safe. He would be okay, and that knowledge made her feel like an enormous weight had just been lifted from her shoulders. "Hi, Mom." Izuku was interrupted by a tight hug from his mom, cutting off any attempt at an explanation. Okay," he wheezed. "Minimal injuries. I can't breathe." Quickly, Inko let him go, slumping into a hospital chair as her panic gave way to exhaustion. She looked up, straight at her son, taking in the sight that could so easily have been taken from her today forever. It took a long time until Inko found the strength to speak again. Even longer until she actually did, but Izuku was calm, smiled, and waited for her to start talking. "Are you hurt?" Her voice sounded smaller than she would have liked. Too raspy, too vulnerable. "Do you feel all right? Are you in any pain?" No, yes, only slightly." Izuku answered hesitantly. "The doctors say I can go home whenever I want." And at that point Inko could have cried with relief, but they want to keep Kaken here because of his acid burns. And Inko's heart froze. "I want to wait at least until Aunt Mitsuki and Uncle Masaru have arrived," Izuku added, defiantly, as if fearing she might take him away from his friend now. Inko, however, could only slowly repeat, "Acid burns?" She looked at Katsuki, at Izuku, back at Katsuki, increasingly horrified. "Katsuki, you have acid burns?" Katsuki scowled in irritation. "It's jack shit. Won't even scar, they say, but still want to be completely fucking positive that there ain't any permanent damage." He raised up his bandaged hands in demonstration. "They're really sure there won't be any," Izuku quickly explained at his mother's horrified expression. "It's just that they don't want to take risks. That's why they want to keep him for observation." Inko exhaled, all energy leaving her body. They were going to be okay. Both of them were going to be okay. A few minutes later, Katsuki's parents arrived. They heard them before they saw them. Mitsuki's yelling was nothing if not distinctive. As soon as they'd entered and made sure of both children's well-being, Mitsuki unleashed a barrage of questions on her son. "Are you all right?" "What the foo? Of course I'm all right." "How are your arms?" "There ain't anything wrong about them. Those fucking doctors are just overcautious." "Do you want your plush grenade?" "Shut up, old hag. Don't take that tone with me, brat." Somewhere during the quickly spiraling debate between the two, Masaru's attempts to calm them down being more of a ritual than anything else at this point, Inko had started smiling, and her son had, too. "They won't change, will they?" Izuku asked, looking at Mitsuki pounding her fist against the wall. Inko chuckled. "I suppose not," she admitted, and they lapsed into a comfortable silence while increasingly violent threats resounded in the hospital's corridors. Normalcy would set in again, eventually. A while later. "Oi, Deku," Katsuki said. He'd asked for a few minutes of privacy from their parents. To be honest, he hadn't so much asked as he'd demanded it, in a volume that had surprised even the doctors a few rooms away, and now they sat in the room alone. Usually the mere presence of the other would be enough to set both of them at ease, but not today. "Yes, Kaken." Izuku was careful, as the look in Katsuki's eyes reminded him of his outburst at Gentle, and he knew what it meant. Katsuki was angry, and it wasn't his usual kind of anger that burned hot, but short. No, it was the rarer, simmering anger that came from the depths of the blonde's heart, the one to look out for. It was the sort of anger that'd burn a hole in his soul if left unaddressed, like something you forgot in the oven for too long. We have to become stronger. It didn't sound like an announcement or a question. It sounded like a fact. It sounded like it was the one thing in the world that was certain, even if everything else crumbled away. Izuku nodded. The silence lasted only a few beats before Katsuki burst out. He said that he wasn't cut out for it. There was some kind of cold, sharp desperation in his voice that didn't fit the 8-year-old it belonged to. And he was stronger than us. So much stronger. Izuku didn't say anything. Currently, Katsuki didn't need advice. Katsuki needed to let off steam. That guy was stronger than anyone I've met before, way stronger. And he talked about how he'd had his chance or something. I mean, was he at a hero school or something? And failed? That guy, who took down that villain like it was nothing. Katsuki became increasingly agitated, talking faster and faster, as if his mouth couldn't keep up with his thoughts. I mean, what kind of competition is that? If he failed, just what kind of shit are we up against? He looked at his bandaged hands in frustration. If we want just as much as a chance to get into UA, we can't go on like this. We have to get stronger. Way stronger. If that's what we're going to compete with. Got it, Deku? Izuku nodded. But still, and now Katsuki was quiet. Maybe he'd remembered their parents might hear them if they were too loud. Maybe he was simply pensive. Either way, his voice was suddenly so low that Izuku had to concentrate on listening to understand him. You know, Deku, it worked. What we did, it actually worked. We were holding our ground against a fucking villain. I mean, we ain't even 10 years old, and we're still alive after that. We weren't just wasting our time with that training, Deku. It worked. Katsuki's eyes narrowed as he slowly flexed his fingers. So, we're going to continue with that. At least with that. After all, fuck, our aim isn't just any hero school. It's UA. The competition's guaranteed to be even stronger there. You're right, Izuku said quietly. We have a ways to go. We will get stronger, Kaken, and we will get into UA for sure. Of course we will. Katsuki snapped back. But, fuck, that was a real villain. That's what we're going to fight if we become heroes. And, next time we won't have a gentle at hand. Izuku nodded. He knew what Katsuki meant. For all his talk about strength and training, and no matter how right he was about how it had saved them today, in the end, they hadn't stood a chance against a villain. And as children, they weren't supposed to. But they wouldn't stay children forever. They'd grow up, and by then they'd have to be prepared. April 15th, 23XX, 6 years after Heroes started. 3:13 p.m. at the Cherry Tree. 57, 58, 59, 60. Izuku finished his second set of push-ups and sighed. The weather was unseasonably muggy, and even though he'd barely been at it for half an hour, his shirt was already drenched with sweat, making moving around really uncomfortable. He grabbed his water bottle and took a few sips before getting up and bracing himself for his turn at the punching bag. Now Dai, Katsuki yelled, and unleashed an explosion-fortified right hook that made the poor bag rocket upwards, nearly winding itself around the branch. They'd had to replace the bag 5 times by now. This one, custom-made for people with destructive quirks, had actually resisted Katsuki for 8 months, which really gave Izuku a sense of appreciation for the manufacturer. I still don't think that Dai is the best choice for a battle cry if you want to reassure the citizens, Izuku drily remarked. Katsuki huffed, but didn't object as he cleared the way for Izuku. He started with slow, deliberate straight-arm punches and kicks, mindful of how and when his strikes connected. His arms were still sore from the push-ups, so he made sure not to overexert himself as he gradually increased the speed of his movements, still paying attention to the rhythm of the impacts. Control was more important than speed. Getting ahead of yourself just meant you were prone to make mistakes you could have easily prevented, which was why Izuku only upped the ante after he was sure his motions were as fluid and precisely timed as he could manage. 2 strikes a second became 3, 3 became 4, 4 became 5, and so on, until he'd arrived at a veritable drumfire of impacts. It came easy to him by now, a testimony to months of dedicated training exercises, until he'd managed to hit the bag just right, dead center, every time. It had been frustrating months. His progress had seemed slow to him and sluggish until, one day, he'd performed flawlessly. That day it had hit him just how far he'd come since square one. Now it was time for the difficult part. Izuku frowned in concentration, reaching for the tickling sensation of matter adaptation that slumbered within him. It obeyed without delay, fluctuating under the skin of his fists, while Izuku tried to adapt the material of the punching bag the exact second his fists connected with it. In theory, this should lead to his fists taking minimal damage from punching hard surfaces by adapting their material. However, the level of fine control necessary to pull it off was high. The time frame he had for it amounted to just a few milliseconds. As a result, he wasn't yet able to tailor his quirk activation to his punches as he'd have liked to, and most of his test runs remained without satisfying results. Suddenly, Izuku heard a slight shift behind him. Without hesitation, he punched the bag again, not withdrawing his fist as his back took on the properties of the resilient material mere moments before Katsuki's strike connected with his rear. "You're getting better," the blonde begrudgingly conceded. Izuku nodded without relaxing his efforts as he tried to sustain his rhythm as long as possible. After 90 seconds and 2 more parried surprise attacks, he stopped, breathing heavily, but smiling. "Did it work?" Katsuki asked gruffly. Izuku nodded, looking at his fist that was indistinguishable from the bag in its blue-black color. "Only once, though, but at least it proved that it is possible." He frowned. "Still, I tried it 314 times, and it worked only once. I'd need a success rate of at least 30% if I wanted to have any use in training, let alone in actual combat, which means I'd have to get about 100 times better at it to be able to maybe use it while sparring." Deku. And that doesn't yet factor in that in sparring my opponent wouldn't just stand idle, but attack themselves, which means I may want to assume 200 as improvement factor instead, which means it would take rather long to master without being a completely reliable asset in actual combat. There's also the problem that my quirk doesn't work on living things, so it'd be limited to armored opponents. "Oi, Deku." Additionally, Izuku continued, picking up speed, "I can't be sure that it is geared for longer fights, since it requires many consecutive transformations, one for each punch. It'd only affect 2 different materials, so the physical fatigue wouldn't set in that fast, but it'd still limit its overall usefulness and make it more a backup technique than anything else. Therefore, Deku, cut it out." Katsuki snapped. Izuku startled and looked up, then sighed. "I did it again, didn't I?" Katsuki glowered at him. "I hate it when you do that. Where does this fucking mumbling even come from? Somehow I doubt that your mom taught you." Izuku rubbed the back of his head, abashed. "Sorry, Kakin. And quit the Kakin already. It's annoying. You do call me Deku, though, and that's not even nice." Katsuki rolled his eyes, but kept silent. October 27th, 23XX. 8 years after Heroes started. 5:08 p.m. at the cherry tree. "You sure you want to do this?" Katsuki doubted. Not that he'd chicken out of this, but "I do. This idea. I think it has the potential to bring me to your level," Izuku declared with a hint of trepidation, but determined nevertheless. "In your dreams, Deku," Katsuki retorted, though he couldn't really bring himself to feel angry at him. If the nerd wanted to do this, he wouldn't be the one to tell him otherwise. It'd make him a better sidekick, after all. And if Deku's motivation to get stronger was to get on his level, well, he'd get more realistic one day. Right then, Katsuki shrugged and handed over the rubber glove. Nothing special about the thing itself, but it wasn't the point anyway. Izuku nodded and dripped a few drops of water into its fingers. "Only a small part of your nail. Remember that, Deku." All right, he was a bit tense. After all, this shit could lead to Deku losing his finger, or worse if he fucked it up. "Don't worry, Kakin." "I don't," he snapped, but it didn't really sound convincing even to himself. "I studied for my quirk since I was 7, Izuku explained resolutely. "I even had additional tuition in chemistry and biology to make sure I don't go too far, and I know how dangerous this is. And you know I wouldn't do it if I didn't feel like I was ready, Kakin." He swallowed. "And of course I'm not sure. I'm really nervous. But I have to do this." "TCH, whatever." Katsuki tried to keep the frown off his face and maintain the facade of indifference. but he didn't think he succeeded as he'd have liked. Just get over with the shit already. Izuku slid his hand into the glove. He took a deep breath and concentrated. He took his time for it. Any distraction could prove to be disastrous. Any mistake might be fatal. He'd visualized every step he had to take countless times, and he did it once more as he focused on the water in the glove. Oxygen, hydrogen, covalently joined. H2O, molecules linked by hydrogen bridge bonds. Water. Matter adaptation answered his call readily, and he was careful as he gently coaxed it through his hand, then through his pinky finger. Only in one tiny bit of his fingernail. Only in that minuscule spot of hardened protein. Only in that infinitesimal speck of alpha-keratin, there the adaptation would take place. Only there. Focus, Izuku. Focus. The familiar tingling sensation coursed through his veins as the cells in his body, in blatant disregard for the rules of anatomy, reacted to the material and adapted. Fucking hell, Katsuki whispered when Izuku doffed the glove. There it was. On Izuku's pinky finger, the tiniest piece of nail had transformed into water. Izuku grinned. 5th of April, 20XX, 10 years after Heroes started. 2:32 p.m. at Aldera Middle School. It's high time now that you all start thinking about your future, Kaiba Tadashi, their current homeroom teacher, lectured. I'll be distributing your high school choice forms now. This is one of the most important decisions in your life, so think your choice over carefully. Though, the man then threw the forms into the air in a needlessly dramatic fashion that prompted some serious doubt about his professionality from Izuku's side. You'll probably aim for the hero course anyway. Right on cue, the class burst out in pandemonium as every student simultaneously showed off their quirk in the flashiest way imaginable. Izuku sighed in resignation and picked up 2 forms from the floor while transforming his eardrums into fabric, hoping to muffle the sound somewhat. As usual, it had no effect. Due to some idiosyncrasy of his quirk, he didn't fully understand his senses were not hindered in the slightest by his transformations, intentional or not. Izuku handed one of the sheets to Katsuki, who received it with a smirk that Izuku hesitantly returned as a smile. Of course, the two of them already knew what they were going to write, but that didn't change the fact that this was the very first official step on their way to heroism. It'd be a stretch to say they were actually anxious about it, but it seemed the slightest bit daunting to him still. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks, Kaiba scolded indulgently. On the other hand, at least he scolded them at all. But remember that it is still forbidden for you to use them in. Boy, teach. Don't put us together with those extras. Izuku sighed as without hesitation the whole class started to shout angrily in Katsuki's and, by extension, his own direction. He made himself a bit smaller and backed away from the blonde's desk. Only moments before Katsuki quieted the crowd with an explosion and then proceeded to vocally demonstrate his resourcefulness when it came to the creative application of the Japanese language. It was kind of impressive just how many insults one could fit in a single statement. Yes, Kaiba made an attempt at de-escalating the situation. You two are aiming for UA High School, right? Well, at least the fucking extras had shut up now. Time for the top dog to lay it out to them. That's right, Katsuki stated smugly. It's the school with the best hero course in the whole country. Only the best of the best get in at UA. The cream of the crop. And that's exactly why you're rabble. Or did any of you pushovers actually bother to apply? When no one answered, Katsuki smiled sardonically. See, none of you are hero material. You don't aim for the top? Then don't bother trying. Come on, Kaken, Izuku complained. Why do you have to make them hate us unnecessarily? Katsuki just sked and rolled his eyes. While their classmates were somewhat salty towards them for the rest of the lesson, Katsuki seemed to have effectively shut up most of the pests disguised as humans. Needless to say, he was pleased. All right, now it's official, Izuku cheered when they left class. We're finally on our road to become heroes. We were on that road since we were 4, Katsuki grumbled, more to keep up appearances than anything else. But still, now there are 2 forms on the teacher's desk, with our names and UA High School on it. Isn't that just amazing to think of, Kaken? Whatever. It's theory for today, so get on with it while I get some stuff for the old hag. Izuku nodded and took out hero strategies for the future in R6. Okay, so the first scenario is 7 years old. You have a building in which at least 5 hostages are held, 3 of them children. The exact number of hostages is unknown. The villains are on the 4th floor, a group of 6 with 1 lightning armor, 2 strength enhancements, 1 good ears, and 2 unknown. Hurry up already, Deku. Izuku cut him a look and proceeded. Your hero team consists of Amit, Switch, Bunny Rabbit, Braindasher, Ray, and Shikigami. You have an additional 12-man corps of policemen, and the building has 2 entrances plus a heliport. They discussed Katsuki's rather straightforward strategy, which had involved just a tad too many synonyms of the word die for Izuku's taste, while heading to the grocery store when suddenly Izuku got a strong sense of déjà vu. They were in a small alleyway toward the store in a heated debate over Solar Zero's potential in indoor fights, when suddenly something emerged from the drain in front of them. The creature was a dark, murky green that resembled vomit or mud, with 2 yellow eyeballs and a grin that showed too many teeth. The creature, which would later become known as the sludge villain, swiftly started to envelop Katsuki's body before they could even perceive what was happening. The blonde screamed in fury and thrashed against the sludge, managing to land 2 solid blows to its face before the villain got hold of his hands and, with visible strain, forced his palms away from him. The whole procedure hadn't taken much longer than 4 seconds, and Izuku was left staring at him in shock. That body seems to be a lucky strike, the villain said with a chuckle. Don't worry, it will only hurt for about a minute before I reach your brain, and it's over. The villain was cut off by a fist of solid concrete that connected with one of his eyeballs. He was forced to back onto the street as a truly furious Izuku started to attack him relentlessly, a piece of asphalt in his left hand. Let Kakin go. Right now? Every word was accompanied by a fierce punch, but he's liquid, the clear-thinking part of Izuku's mind realized. My blows can't harm him. The villain sneered before striking him with Katsuki's palm. The boy's eyes widened in terror as Deku hurtled through the air from the force of his explosion, abused in a way that just couldn't be, forcing him to let go of the asphalt piece. It was the biggest and most dangerous drawback of Deku's quirk. When he didn't have anything to adapt, he was completely defenseless. So when Deku struck against a lamppost and slumped over, Katsuki could do nothing but watch, helpless, screaming against the thick, disgusting sludge that covered his face and started suffocating him. April 5th, 20XX. A few minutes earlier, at the top of a nearby building, the #1 hero, All Might, stood at the edge of an apartment tower with a bag of groceries in his hand and a slightly confused grin. Somehow that sludge villain had escaped through the sewers and had actually managed to throw him, All Might, off his trail. On top of that, he barely had any spare time from the 3 hours he'd left for active duty. The hero sighed. If the villain didn't show up in a few moments, he'd have to leave him to his colleagues. When he noticed an explosion a few blocks away, he instantly knew where it originated from. All Might prepared himself and leapt over the streets, the grocery bag still firmly in his hand. This evildoer would not taint the town much longer, for he was here, having finally reached his time limit. Shit. All Might landed on the roof of a nearby building, changing into his true form. This was bad timing on a whole new level. He muttered a few distinguished American expletives before rushing down the stairs. Part of his brain registered the exhaustion the short sprint had caused him and responded with resignation, but his main focus was on the scene that unfolded before him when he opened the door. Chaos. That simply was the best way to describe it. The sludge villain had apparently taken a boy with an explosion quirk hostage, and the desperate lad fought him tooth and nail, turning the street into a minefield. All Might. No, now he was just Yagi Tashinori, looked around. Backdraft and Kimui Woods were busy with evacuation, and Death Arms and MT Lady hadn't been able to do anything against the rampaging villain due to their quirk disadvantage. And All Might couldn't do jack shit. That was when he spotted him. A youngster with unruly green hair and selectively hideous red shoes, who was in the villain's dead angle, struggling to his feet. It seemed that he had been hurled against a lamppost, so the fact that he was able to stand at all was astounding in itself. Then Tashinori saw his eyes, and the boy rushed in. The heroes watched in helpless horror as he ran towards the villain with fierce determination, sticking his suddenly dark gray arm into the sludge and screaming something Tashinori couldn't understand. But the effect on the other boy was unmissable. All at once, his arms were stretched in front of him, and he roared. Repulsion outburst. The explosion that followed was enormous. Tashinori's lanky form was barely able to withstand the torrid shockwave that made the windows burst and the tarmac fracture, that took the villain by surprise and blinded everyone. Everyone, except the green-haired boy who had somehow managed to yank the blonde out of the mud and dragged him away, his expression contorted in decision. The villain roared with fury and took up pursuit, but enough was enough. Detroit. Smash. His forceful blow crashed in the unsuspecting villain, sending him splattering in an omnidirectional wave. The one and only All Might laughed his signature booming laugh, hiding the thin trickle of blood in the corner of his mouth while announcing, "Fear not, citizens, for I am here." A few moments of silence, and then cheering. "It's All Might. The number one hero has come to rescue us. We're saved." Did it start raining? It really started raining. All Might changed the weather with a single punch. That's the power of the symbol of peace. Haha. All Might laughed more boisterously than he felt. "Thank you all for your support. Now let us collect this scoundrel's residues for that he does not endanger anyone again." As the heroes followed his advice, All Might turned his attention to the two boys, of which the blonde one was currently chewing out his green-haired friend. "Have you lost your marbles, Deku? That was fucking reckless. What the hell were you thinking? We didn't practice the repulsion outburst at all. So why for fuck's sake didn't you at least try and think of a strategy before rushing in like an imbecile?" "That? I don't know, Kakin," the green-haired boy exclaimed. "I don't know why I did that. I saw you were in danger, right in front of me, and my legs all moved by themselves." That piqued All Might's interest. "You're an absolute fuckwad, you know that? How the hell were you even able to stand up after being thrown against a fucking lamppost?" "Ahem. I changed the back of my head into fabric. That cushioned the impact," the other boy said defensively. "And apart from that." "Ahem." Both boys turned around, and suddenly, "It's All Might." The blonde closed his eyes. And there the fanboying goes. "All Might. The real All Might. In front of me? Oh, an autograph." The boy scrambled for his school bag and took out a well-thumbed, but obviously cared-for notebook. "Hero Analysis for the Future. Number 13? All Might took the book and swiftly scrawled a bold autograph across 2 pages. Nothing he hadn't done countless times already. Still, one simply couldn't fail to note the richness of detail in which the notes were compiled. Incredible. Truly incredible. How does he know this about Night Eye? I didn't know this about Night Eye, and he's been my sidekick for years. Maybe he's the right one." "Forgive me," he said to the boys. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation, and I have a proposal for you. Would you mind to meet me at 5 p.m. at Dagoba Municipal Beach?" After that, the hero was surrounded by fans and reporters, laughing ostentatiously and dropping catchphrases. Meanwhile, Katsuki tried to prevent Izuku's brain from shutting down by yelling at him. "DKU, get a fucking hold of yourself, you hear me? But All Might just asked us to meet him." "I heard what he said. Now pull yourself together. Let's deal with the heroes and the police and the other shit, and fuck." Katsuki's fist hit the ground. Once, twice, his eyes full of angry fire, roaring behind his pupils. I was a drag. Again, I couldn't do shit." "That's not true, Kakin," Izuku responded, appalled. Suddenly, All Might's words seemed a lot less important, and that meant something coming from him. Really, how could Katsuki say something like this? There were no serious injuries, and the villain is captured, because you withstood him for such a long time. Besides, it was your repulsion outburst that vaulted you out of the sludge, wasn't it? He is right. The boys looked in surprise at the 2 pro heroes who had come over, Death Arms and Kemui Woods. "You displayed great willpower, young man," the former stated. "So don't sell yourself short. What do you think would have happened if the villain had been able to use your quirk against the citizens? You prevented a disaster." Additionally, Kemui Woods stated, looking at Izuku, that was what I'd call quick thinking. Reckless, granted, but quick thinking nonetheless. He nodded in approval. Of course you didn't use your quirk against a citizen, right? So it was quite impressive what you were able to do just by analyzing him. The hero winked. Actually, Izuku started when Katsuki jabbed him in the ribs. Yeah, exactly, Katsuki answered with affected vexation. I did tell him that he was a fucking idiot for jumping into battle like that, too. But I guess everything's all right now, huh? The heroes nodded, Death Arm smiling somewhat mischievously before letting the two boys go. Really, Deku? Katsuki sighed when they were a fair way off from the commotion. They cut you a break, and you nearly managed to ruin it. You'd have gotten deeper in the shit for using your quirk without permission. I'm sorry, Kakin, but well, Izuku faltered. What? Can we please freak out now that All Might wants to meet us? The same day? 4:58 p.m. at Dagoba Municipal Beach. Izuku was on edge, subconsciously adapting the rubber of his shoe soles. All Might wants to meet us, All Might wants to meet us, what should it, All Might wants to meet us, Simpsoner Vasana, what if we did something wrong, or it was just a joke, no, All Might doesn't make a jokes about things like this, but what does she want from? Cut it, DKU. I'm tired of your rambling, so shut the fuck up. Izuku did slap his mouth shut, but emitted such a fierce worry-aura that Katsuki could nearly see the mutter symbols swirling around him. He sighed in annoyance. I am here, ready to talk to you too. Izuku yelped, and Katsuki already had an explosion prepared before his senses told him that. It's All Might. It's All Might. It's... Katsuki gave Deku a flick on the forehead that likely prevented him from dying of multiple organ failure. He hoped the idiot wouldn't make a habit out of that, but knew it was probably in vain. It indeed is me. Now then. All Might vanished in a puff of smoke and was replaced by a gaunt man with skeleton-like features. Ah, it's a fake. Who the hell are you? If you're an imposter, I'll... Toshinori sighed in exasperation. He should have anticipated something like this to happen. No, I really am All Might. This is what you could call my true form. No way. You totally deflated. Yeah, looks kinda pathetic. Toshinori gave them the look. The one he'd practiced countless times in the mirror. The intense gaze that instilled fear in the hearts of villains and hope in the hearts of citizens in an instant. The one that proclaimed, I am here. To everyone who looked at him. It was a reduced version, but it was still enough to prove his point. So now that you know about this, I must ask you not to tell a word to anyone. Especially not on social media. Understood? Course we do, Katsuki scoffed, but was obviously shaken. So what the fuck does this have to do with? Patience, please. Toshinori braced himself for what he was going to do. It had to be immaculate. Young Deku, young Kakin, you see, 5 years ago, a villain. Actually, my name isn't Deku. And I'm not Kakin. Damn it. That's your fault, Deku. Seriously, Kakin? Toshinori watched the two of them in confusion. So much for immaculate. Well, then, would you mind to tell me your names? Of course. I'm Midoriya Izuku. Bakugo Katsuki. After this gaffe, Toshinori had lost some of his confidence, but nevertheless, he'd made his choice. So he lifted up his shirt and watched the boy's expressions shift from confusion to horror. This is an injury I got from an enemy's attack 5 years ago. It cost me half my respiratory organs and my whole stomach. What you see in front of you is the aftermath that came with the repeated surgeries. Right now, I can only work as a hero for about 3 hours a day. 3 hours? Katsuki whispered, unbelieving, not wanting to hear this. He felt like breaking something or blowing something up right now, because that couldn't be true. There was just no way that couldn't be true. But you are the #1 hero. You emerge victorious from every battle. You are the fucking permasmile symbol of peace. Is that all just a charade? Toshinori sighed. No, this injury is something special. Wait, 5 years. So, was that in your fight against Toxic Chainsaw? Toshinori arched his eyebrows. You are well informed. But no, a punk like that could never defeat me. The fight was never made public. I asked for that. For the symbol of peace cannot be daunted by evil. For the citizens can view up to someone like young Bakugo. So, Bakugo said falteringly, so you aren't what we believed. You aren't the glorious victor? You aren't the aim one can set oneself to surpass. Toshinori felt like the discussion was not going in the direction he'd planned. Don't get me wrong, young Bakugo. I am the symbol of peace. I am the strongest hero. He looked him straight in the eyes, young Bakugo's expression telling him that he had his full attention. But I am not invincible, no one is. And the villain I fought 5 years ago was the strongest opponent I've ever encountered. Even so, in the end, I did defeat him. That villain is gone for good. Bakugo seemed wary and obviously didn't want to allow the topic to rest, but he didn't probe further. Well, Toshinori said, trying to adopt a more cheerful tone, I did not come here to bother you with my past. I came to ask you a question and to offer you something. Midoriya looked at him in surprise. Offer? Firstly, the question, do you two want to become heroes? Yes. You bet. Toshinori smiled. Firmly, and without hesitation. He was back on track. Why? I want to become the strongest hero. In Bakugo's eyes lied justified self-confidence. In his years as a pro, All Might had learned to tell apart if it was based on blustering or on skill. This boy knew about both his strength and his limits. You hardly found that in someone that young. I'll climb the top and surpass anyone else. Even you, All Might. Toshinori looked at him in approval. He couldn't say he was surprised. He had the fighter attitude that was necessary for such an ambition. It would take much out of him, but if he stuck to it, it wouldn't be impossible. And you, young Midoriya? Izuku cast down his eyes, looking a tad embarrassed. I want to become someone who people look up to. A fearless hero, one who saves everyone with a smile, just like you. Toshinori smiled. Now he knew it for sure. He was the right one. Then I have one more question for you, young Midoriya. The boy gazed at him expectantly. Would you like to become my successor? What All Might disclosed to them that day was going to change their lives. That much they'd known the instant the hero had revealed his true form before them. But never would they ever have dreamed that something like that was going to happen. All Might talked for just about 2 minutes. He explained that his quirk was named One for All, and that it was something passed on through the generations. He briefly mentioned his predecessor, though neither of them had ever heard the name Shimura Nana before. He explicated his reasons for choosing Izuku, namely that he wanted to be the type of hero One for All was cut out for, a hero who saved people just for the sake of it, not to prove himself and not to make money, not for fame and not out of spite. Izuku was positively overwhelmed. He'd taken out his notebook, furiously scribbling in it every bit of information All Might gave. The pro hero, whose true name was Yagi Toshinori, as he'd stated, had watched him somewhat amusedly. Then, he'd asked Izuku if he wanted to inherit One for All. Izuku accepted without missing a beat. And Katsuki had stayed silent the whole time. All Might had praised the good shape the boy was in, stating that 7 or 8 months of intensive training would probably be enough to make him suited as a vessel for his quirk. Izuku had agreed in an instant after the hero had explained that his arms could pop off otherwise. That was the moment Katsuki spoke again. I'll come too. Toshinori looked at him in pleasant surprise, though the boy's voice was coarse and his body was shaking slightly. Izuku looked at him with a sense of foreboding. Katsuki hadn't yelled or cussed in 5 minutes now, and seemed to bottle up the anger he usually displayed on the outside. Izuku was overcome with joy after All Might's proposition, but Katsuki was his best, and more or less only, friend. So when Katsuki said he wanted to come, too, he knew he wasn't over. Of course you may accompany us, young Bakugo, Yagi stated. In this case, I'll surpass you. Katsuki took a deep breath and looked them both straight in the eye. That was always my aim, to be better than fucking All Might. So if you have his power, Deku, then I'll just surpass you too. Izuku looked at Katsuki in amazement. Had he just challenged him? Actually, I'm surprised that I didn't already go ballistic. Katsuki smirked. Fuck, I probably have, but you talked about your predecessor, eh? And the fact that even Deku hasn't ever heard of her means that she was a mediocrity, at best. So Deku, you can get All Might's power for all I care. But I'll still climb the top. I am still going to be the top hero. I don't need All Might's power for that. I will be better than you. Izuku looked at him. In his eyes burned an angry fire, but not the usual one that was akin to a lit fuse. This anger seemed colder and more calculating. Then Katsuki smirked. A little. Seems like I made the damn right choice when I said I wanted you as my sidekick. If All Might acknowledged you and I'd have wasted my time with wings and fingers, I'd probably have gone off the deep end. Well, Tashinori said, relieved that he didn't destroy the strange friendship the two of them had. In this case, come to this beach again tomorrow. But I have to warn you, this training will put you through hell. Are you sure you can do this? Izuku and Katsuki chuckled before nodding, one determinedly, one defiantly. 2 fires. The right choice. February 26th, 20XX, 10 months later. 8:21 in front of UA High School. Hell had been low-key. The two of them had spent the majority of the last 10 months at the beach, clearing away the garbage. That included car tires, microwaves, chairs, beer bottles, something that exhibited an unsettling resemblance to a cartouche, 9 sofas, 4 fridges, and a broken van. For some parts of these, they had had to work together. For others, All Might had instructed them to do it alone. Izuku had been positively flabbergasted when he'd seen the amazingly detailed American Dream plan All Might had put together. Katsuki had refrained from alluding to the some 20 notebooks he'd filled by now. When it had come to One for All itself, it had been anticlimactic. Izuku still felt sick when thought about it. Eat this. Yuck. How did that hair taste sour? But at least he'd had the time to examine the reaction of One for All to his own quirk somewhat. For his first test, he'd transformed the bones in his right arm into diamond. All Might had confirmed that even One for All was not enough to break the hardest material found in nature, so it had seemed like a safe start. The diamond needed for this they'd bought a bit earlier. It was a small industrial diamond, and he'd seen plastic toys prettier than it, but it fulfilled its purpose. As he ascertained, it was not the sort of safe start he'd wished for. While the punch hadn't affected his diamond bones, it had still caused injuries in his muscle tissue. For the second test, he'd transformed the whole left arm into diamond. That was debilitating, but he'd only dislocated his shoulder, and the punch he'd packed had been quite noticeable. However, he'd realized that the Diamond Detroit Smash, quit the fanboying Deku, had only been around 60% of All Might's strength. Apparently, One for All was more suited for an organic conduit, thereby lessening its efficiency if used in diamond mode. But since Izuku had planned to have both of his arms at his disposal when the entrance exam came around, he'd refrained from probing without diamond protection. I still don't really get why you want to take the entrance exam, Katsuki said in exasperation. You had the chance to get in via a recommendation by All Might. Why the fuck do you want to try it the hard way? Izuku sighed. Because I don't want to get in just due to the fact that All Might trained me. I want to earn this place by myself. Be honest, you'd have done the same thing. Katsuki shrugged but didn't object. Whatever, let's do this. With that, he dragged Izuku behind him towards the gigantic building that was UA High School. The best, the most elite hero school in Japan. Their aim since they were old enough to understand the concept of a hero school. Izuku was positively awestruck. This is the gate All Might went through when he was a student. The same holds true for Endeavor, Best Jeanist, Gang Orca, Edshot, Airjet, Kemui Woods. Cut it, Deku. You'll be the fucking class weirdo if you don't get your word vomiting under control. Izuku nodded apologetically and followed Katsuki into the building. The first thing he heard was, "Oi, extras, move it." Izuku facepalmed. I'm sorry for him. He's a bit nervous, so he kinda lashes out like this. He doesn't mean it. Izuku apologized and bowed politely before anyone in the entrance hall would start a fight with them. Before Katsuki could yell that of course he meant it, Izuku tugged him into the auditorium they were instructed to go to. Please, Kaken, couldn't you at least try and be, well, nice to the other participants? At least 1 or 2 of the people you just insulted will probably be our classmates. Katsuki rolled his eyes. TSK. With some of them, I wonder why they even applied in the first place. Did you see that squirt with the ball hair? I swear, if he manages to get into UA, I'll come to our first school day in a pajama. Izuku's sweat dropped. Maybe, just maybe, he'd underestimated the difficulties that came with policing Katsuki. After the written exam. All right, listeners. Welcome to today's live performance. Everybody say hey. Silence. Izuku instantly switched to fanboy mode. It's the voice hero, present Mike. Of course, I know that all the teachers here are actual pro heroes, but this is a whole different feeling. I listen to his radio show every week. Shut up. We've been over this. Well, all right, my examinee listeners. I'm Present Mike, and I'm here to show you the guidelines and get you all pumped up. Are you ready? Yeah. If he was dejected because no one answered him, he hit it quite well. Present Mike went on in the same style and the same volume, explaining the quite basic rules for the practical exam. It resembled some old video games Katsuki had brought over to a surprisingly high extent. Suddenly, a teenager who was instantly labeled as stuck-up by Katsuki raised his arm and complained about an inaccuracy Izuku was sure Mike had been about to explain. Then the boy turned around. "And you there, the plain-looking one with the curly hair." Izuku looked at him, the tiniest bit annoyed. "You've been muttering this whole time. It's distracting. If this is some kind of game to you, please leave immediately." Izuku stood up, offended. "I'm sorry, but you were the one who interrupted the introduction in the first place with a question that was clearly about to be answered. Besides, do you really believe anyone in this room is here because they think it's a game?" Realizing what he'd just done, Izuku sat down again and adapted the material of his seat in embarrassment, though Katsuki smirked appreciatively at him. "No need to start a fight, boys. The fourth sort of robot is a gimmick that wreaks havoc in the city. It gives 0 points, so while it's possible to fight it, it only costs time. My advice is to just avoid it." Present Mike grinned. "That's it from me. I'll leave my listeners with our school motto. The great hero Napoleon Bonaparte once said, 'True heroism consists in being superior to the ills of life.'" Further beyond. A rush of delight made every cell of his body tingle as he shouted, along with the whole auditorium, UA's fabled catchphrase. Plus ultra. After the introduction was at an end, the stuck-up came over. "I am here to apologize," he stated, chopping his hands around in some weird motion. "I offended you without even knowing anything about you, much less being in any position to judge you. I hope you harbor me no ill will, though I can understand if you do. Please accept my sincerest." "It's all right." Izuku hastened to reassure him. "I was disrespectful, too. I don't hold anything against you." The boy sighed in relief. "You have my thanks." "Ooh, of course. I'm Midoriya Izuku," he said. This Katsuki's look was deadlier than every weapon Izuku had ever heard of. "I mean, Bakugo. Bakugo Katsuki." "Well then, I am pleased to meet you, Midoriya-san Bakugo-san. My name is Ida 10. "Yeah, well, I'm not," Katsuki sneered. "So do me a favor and bugger off." The amount of indignation Ida displayed would have been hilarious, but for the sheer embarrassment Izuku felt. How rude. Why would you? Bakugo flipped him off and trudged away. Izuku apologized to the indignant Ida before following Katsuki. "Kaken, please. If you want me to stop my mumbling habit, at least attempt to not just insult everyone who talks to you." "TSK. Don't TSK me, Kaken." At exercise ground B, front gate. Izuku looked over the other contestants. Some of them seemed quite unassuming, though of course he couldn't know what lied below the surface. Some were nervous, others brimmed with confidence, and still others were appreciating the competition. Quickly he'd spotted those he believed to be the most dangerous opponents. Ida, who apparently had some technology-based quirk, a girl with an orange side ponytail who seemed really tough, a boy taller than most grown-ups with 6 arms and a face mask, and a boy with an appraising look and jet black skin. He would try to stay away from those. No need to scrap over the targets with the strong ones. "All right, start." Everyone looked up in surprise. "What are you waiting for? Real battles don't have a countdown, you know?" Izuku reacted immediately and transformed his legs into diamond. Fortunately, he'd already slipped on the rings, so he didn't lose any further time. Then, he channeled one for all in his legs and jumped. He realized his mistake quite immediately. Since he didn't have any control over it, he'd blown a crater in the floor that toppled some of the other combatants and was now flying quite high and fast towards the roof of a nearby building. Quickly, he adapted the rubber of his second ring and bounced off of the surface, thereby preventing damage. Then he got an overview of the situation. Most examinees were behind him, save for Ida and the black-skinned boy who apparently possessed some type of space-time quirk, teleporting through the shadows. He noticed that, while a substantial amount of robots were located in the central alley, that was where the mass was heading. Inconvenient. He wouldn't make many points there. Too much competition. Instead, Izuku jumped from building to building until he was a good way off from the main fight before leaping down into an alleyway. The situation unpleasantly reminded him of the two villain incidents he'd survived by now, but then again, compared to Lime and the sludge villain, you're nothing more than sluggish scrap piles. With that, he charged in. A quick transformation from rubber to diamond allowed him to fend off the rockets a three-pointer fired at him, then to tungsten to endure the heat. After that, he was among the robots, quickly mowing them down with one-for-all-inducted punches. They didn't stand more of a chance than he had when fighting Lime. But then again, he wasn't 9 anymore. All right, he muttered while counting the remains of the robots in the alleyway. That's 17? No, 18 points. I don't know how many I'll need, but this certainly isn't enough. So he quickly moved down the street and began to just make his way through the side streets, systematically clearing them of all robots he could find. 31, 32, 34, 37, he huffed, having destroyed yet another robot squad. It starts to add up. Quickly, he dodged a missile and evaded a two-pointer's tail, jumped on its back and adapted copper in his left hand, just before slamming it onto the slightly exposed control panel in the robot's neck. As he expected, it short-circuited and shut down. 39, progress. Moving on, Izuku had just started to ambush two three-pointers when suddenly the ground started to shake. An earthquake? No, it comes in regular intervals. Maybe the effect of someone's quirk? In that case. Then the screaming started, and as Izuku looked up to whatever had just thrown a shadow over the alley, he exactly knew why. The zero-pointer? Isn't that a bit too big? Izuku wasn't really aware of where he was. He'd just blasted his way through the side streets. He didn't have any idea where the entrance was located. So he just repeated his technique from earlier, jumped on a nearby building, and tried to get an idea of the damage, which was colossal. Like a giant behemoth, the zero-pointer moved forward, wreaking havoc on its way and crushing nearby buildings as if they were made of glass. The examinees scattered in all directions, desperately trying to flee the technological monstrosity. Izuku recognized the gate in the distance and got ready to jump when he saw the girl. She had gray hair and pale skin, struggling as her left leg was pinned down under a boulder. The zero-pointer was only 3 steps away, and it was raising its arm. Izuku rushed in without thinking. Again. Sorry, Kaken. He was on the ground in an instant and dashed in the girl's direction, his leg adapting tungsten. Fast, fast. I can't just watch. He kicked the boulder off the girl's leg, who groaned in pain. The robot did another step and prepared for assault. Izuku didn't stop to contemplate. He didn't have a plan. He jumped. His fist collided with the tremendous robot's metal limb and bore straight through it. He still had momentum. How? No pondering right now. His left arm changed into diamond. Diamond. Detroit. Smash. The robot's head was blasted apart. The familiar smell of explosions perfumed the air. Scrap and pieces of iron came down like rain, and Izuku did, too. His adrenaline-fueled mind cleared, and the pain started. Izuku nearly retched when he saw the state his legs and right arm were in. He had forgotten to adapt diamond in there before charging in, and even worse, his right leg had still been in tungsten mode. It was bent in a sickening angle. But that didn't matter anyway because he was currently falling to death. Izuku's eyes widened. A smash on the ground now? Diamond, in his left arm. Quick. No. The ground was approaching. Too fast, damn. Suddenly, his fall slowed down, and from one moment to the other, the direction he was moving it changed from vertical into horizontal. Izuku grunted when he hit the ground with still some force, though he definitely preferred this over ending up as a bloody pulp. His mind was fuzzy, and he couldn't make too much sense of the situation. Thank you. Your quick acting prevented me from quite a disgraceful demise. I hope you don't mind that I used my quirk on you to slow down your precipitation. The girl's voice was strained, and her countenance was strangely expressionless, her hands draped down in a zombie-like fashion. She sounded genuinely grateful, though. My name is Yanagi Reiko, the girl introduced herself. You should receive medical attention. Your injuries look dire. Right on cue, Present Mick's boisterous voice announced, "All right, the exam is over." With a bleary look, Izuku spotted a blurred form sauntering in his direction. Oh dear, these are heavy injuries. Your own beloved Quirk did this to you? Through the static, Izuku heard Smooch, felt something moist on his cheek, and drifted into nothingness. 5:24 p.m. at the entrance of the Bakugo household. Izuku had a natural penchant for nervousness, but seldom had he experienced the meaning behind this seemingly innocent word as intensively as he did right now. Waiting for Katsuki to open the door already while having the letter from Yue clutched tightly in his right hand. His mother was just as anxious as he was and bursting to know the result, but he and Katsuki had agreed upon opening their letters together. So here they were. "About time you come along, Deku," Katsuki greeted, feeling slightly tense. He was sure he passed. He'd scored 80 points at least, for fuck's sake, but he wanted certainty. And said certainty laid in an envelope on the coffee table, looking identical to the one Deku had received, save for the address. So he was somewhat impatient. "This is it, Deku." The two of them had adjourned to Katsuki's room because the moms can wait 5 minutes longer for our fucking scores. On edge, Izuku nodded. Their scores. They would make or break them right now. Both of them ripped apart their envelopes at the same time, and hell broke loose. IA greetings, I projection. Young Bakugo, wondering about your 39 villain points. Appear, judges, attitude. After they had managed to quiet their respective holographic screen and their ears had stopped ringing, Katsuki scowled. We won't talk about this. Ever again. Izuku nodded. This was not how they'd imagined the most important point in their school lives going. All right, second try. I'll start, Katsuki decided and activated his projector. All Might appeared on screen. Greetings from the #1 hero, young Bakugo. Wait, now that I'm thinking about it, why is All Might in the vid? Shut up, Deku. Now you surely ask yourself, why does All Might appear in your UA message? Well, the answer is, because I am going to teach at UA High School this year. No way, Izuku exclaimed stunned. All Might is. Shut up, DKU. Regarding your score, you managed to destroy 43 robots, racking up a score of 82 villain points in total, which is the highest amount of villain points in 7 years. But there's more to it than that. You see, the judges of the exam also awarded so-called rescue points for heroic behavior like defending other participants, damage containment, and more. Although you are still mostly focused on yourself, you did take heed of your co-competitors and thereby earned 11 rescue points, which make you come to 91 points in total. All Might smiled blindingly. Young Bakugo, you passed. Bakugo smirked. Of course I did. Despite his outward confidence, Izuku could clearly see how his shoulders relaxed in the course of All Might's speech, but decided to keep quiet. He activated his own projector, somewhat self-conscious. He knew he couldn't touch Katsuki's absurdly high score, but he didn't know the assessment standard, and I am here, as a projection. All Might's booming voice effectively shushed him. Since you already heard young Bakugo's video, I will get right to the point. Izuku blinked. How on earth did he know we would hear them together? Probably 'cause we talked about it right under his fucking nose, now? And how did he know we would hear yours first? Katsuki shrugged. True, he did feel a little irritated about being so predictable. Now that you have finished wondering about how I could know this, let's talk about your score. Okay, that was just creepy. You, young Midoriya, destroyed 27 robots, earning impressive 39 villain points. But even more impressed the judges were with your decision to help young Yanagi, quickly rushing in, without thinking, huh? All Might laughed boomingly. For your courageous conduct in this dire situation, you were awarded 49 rescue points. That's 88 points in total, placing you at #2 in this year's ranking. Young Midoriya. All Might paused dramatically. You passed. Katsuki cursed as Izuku's eyes started to flood his room, showcasing once more the impressive capacities of the Midoriya tear glands. 8:02 p.m. at Dagoba Municipal Beach. All Might awaited Izuku at the now completely cleaned beach in his true form. The smile he sported was far less impressive than the one his hero form possessed, but to Izuku, it was the greatest smile ever. Genuine. He gave him a high five. All Might gave him a high five. He wouldn't wash hands ever again, and congratulated him on passing. But All Might, you, a teacher at UA? That's... Wait, All Might. No way. Where? Someone in the distance exclaimed. Oh shit. Young Midoriya, repeat after me. Just my eyes playing tricks on me. Just my eyes playing tricks on me. Izuku bowed apologetically. Both of them unwound a bit. Careful, young Midoriya. The boy nodded. Oh, lest I forget, I was neither part of the jury nor have I told any of them about our relationship. Favoritism and all that. Just to ensure you that it was you, and you alone, who got that place at UA. Midoriya nodded gratefully. Thank you very much, all Yajisan. Though, UA. Tashinori looked at him questioningly. What's eating at you, my boy? Well, how could he put this without sounding unappreciative? After I found out you'd be teaching at UA, I realized that you did that because you originally wanted to pick your successor among the students, right? Tashinori nodded. He also now had the faintest idea about where this conversation was heading. And I feel sort of as if I stole those other students their chance to prove themselves to you. You ran over me just by chance, and during the entrance exam, I used one for all without protection, just because I wanted to save one person. Not only that, but you did save her, right, young Midoriya? Izuku looked up at him, confused. What? Yagi smiled. Again, a scary, bony, off-putting, genuine smile. Then, he actually laughed, coughing up some blood in the process, but nobody's perfect. Of course, you couldn't handle it right from the beginning. You also weren't able to fully use matter adaptation when you first got it, right, my boy? Izuku nodded hesitantly. There we are. As it is right now, you can only do all or nothing. But with continued training, you will be able to use one for all more and more freely. So do not worry, for everything is going to be All Might. With that, he changed into his muscle form and twisted the drinking can he held in his hand into a spiral. Then, oh my god, it really is All Might. Amazing. Shit. So they ran away, but Izuku suddenly felt a lot warmer. At a bar, somewhere else. Hirojiiri patiently watched Shigaraki rant about All Might becoming a teacher. Ever since Sensei had brought up that detail, the young man had been in an especially foul mood. The bartender proceeded to polish the glass in his misty hands with just a little more force than necessary. In all honesty, he could barely stand the unstable villain if he was calm, or what counted as calm with Shigaraki, and was downright repulsed by him if he was angry. It was not like he had much of a say in this matter. All for One had instructed him to take care of him, and one simply did not turn down All for One. Do not worry, Shigaraki Tamura. Hirojiiri was mildly surprised by the cordial tone All for One had adopted. Apparently, he had made some sort of progress. Soon, you will be able to fulfill your aim. Not only is our special creation nearly finished, we also have some promising allies. Allies? Hirojiiri's hand moved even faster than before, virtually sterilizing the glass. Sensei. Faced with Shigaraki's petulant whining, Hirojiiri found himself lamenting the long-gone days of contently observing his customers, of bar fights he'd end by teleporting the transgressors outside, the days where he would come home, and Hirojiiri realized that the glass would be of little use in the future if he continued tormenting it like this. Soon, All for One promised warmly, you will be ready. Soon, you will annihilate the symbol of peace. 10th of March, 20XX. 4:09 p.m. at the Midoriya apartment. I'd recommend 3 smaller canisters, Izuku pondered. Those big gauntlets will make easy targets. Katsuki nodded begrudgingly and erased the problematic part. How far are you? Izuku looked at his sheet thoughtfully. Since my costume will have that special feature, I have to send my sketch in tomorrow, so I'll probably stick with this. You still don't want to put in more materials? Katsuki asked doubtfully. You could easily fuck up if you forgot something. Izuku shook his head. Most of the materials I could add now would only be useful under special circumstances, and I don't want to risk adapting the wrong one in the heat of the moment. Katsuki shrugged. All right. He smirked. Though your costume did manage to surprise the shit out of me. I mean, seriously, Deku. It doesn't match your quirk at all. Izuku gave him a deadpan look. I don't want every obscure villain to instantly figure out what my quirk is. They'll have a hard time with this one. If you think so, I still think you should have gone for the lab coat. Izuku finished his drawing and put it into an envelope. The lab coat was a close second. Besides, you can't say this doesn't look cool. Katsuki rolled his eyes. Don't do that so much, Kaken. Izuku quipped. One day they'll get stuck and you'll spend your days looking at the back of your head. Was that you being sassy, Deku? Quit it. 9th of April, 20XX, day of the UA opening ceremony. 8:03 at the Midoriya apartment. Izuku had everything packed, his lunch ready, his uniform on, and he was nail-bitingly nervous. He was going to go to UA right now. It wasn't just a child's dream anymore. It was something real. He was about to do his biggest step so far on the road to becoming a hero, the step that'd bring him closer to his dream than all the ones beforehand. His mother smiled and encouraged him, trying her best to calm him down, but still, it was a bit much. And he was about to be late. As soon as he realized that, he snapped out of his stupor. One last time, pocket tissues? Check. Handkerchief? Check. UAID? Check. Uniform? Check. School bag? Check. He took a deep breath. Bye, Mom. With that, he headed towards UA. 8:22 at UA High School. He couldn't find the way. He was at U.A, and he couldn't find the way in this blasted labyrinth. 1A, 1A, 1A. Oi, Deku. Over here. Izuku turned his head around and took a moment to contemplate the concept of irony. He had literally stood right in front of the suitably intimidating classroom door. About time you come along. It sucks being with this stuck-up and the other extras. Izuku facepalmed. Katsuki had his feet on his desk, with an irate Ida chastising him for his unbecoming behavior. Izuku sighed, took a seat next to Katsuki, and tried to reconcile. As soon as Ida had noticed him, he did these weird hand motions again, while stating, "My greetings, Midoriya-san. I must acknowledge that I was indeed in the wrong, calling you out like this. You were truly superior, as you demonstrated by figuring out the exam's criteria. Unfortunately, I myself was unable to perceive the hidden grading system." By that time, Izuku's face had taken on the gray of his uniform, and he hastened to explain that he didn't notice anything when suddenly, "If you're here to socialize, go home." A giant caterpillar appeared in the door. A few students yelped as it spoke. Then the most wasted-looking man Izuku had ever seen outside of a homeless shelter emerged from the caterpillar/sleeping bag, sucking out a juice pack. "It took you 6 seconds to calm down. Obviously, you all severely lack rationality," he drawled. "I am Aizawa Shota, your homeroom teacher. So far, I'm not pleased to meet you." Then he took out a PE uniform and stated, "I know it's sudden, but put these on and follow me on the training ground outside. If you're late, you'll be expelled." With that, the man left. Instantly, everyone in the class hastened for the door as soon as the shock their homeroom teacher had induced began to wear off. After all, he hadn't specified what exactly late meant. Down at the grounds. "A quirk assessment test?" the class collectively exclaimed. "But what about the entrance ceremony? Guidance sessions? We didn't even get timetables." Aizawa shrugged. "No time for that if you want to become heroes. If you think this is all fun and games, go home." Apparently, their teacher was not a fan of lengthy procedures. "You are familiar with the 8 standard gym tests, yes? Softball throwing, standing long jump, 50-meter dash, and so on. The country still insists on prohibiting quirks while collecting the records. That's not rational. Here at UA, we have a freestyle educational system that especially applies to us teachers." In the course of Aizawa's explanation, the students had become increasingly uneasy. Theoretically, this promised to be fun, but he talked about it like it was going to be their execution. "Bakugo, how far could you throw a softball in middle school?" The blonde smirked. 71 meters. "Great," Aizawa said, in a tone that made it clear that he couldn't care less. "Do it again, but use your quirk. Do whatever you need to, just don't leave the circle." Izuku looked at him in surprise. Most of these exercises favored students whose quirks would to some extent increase their strength, speed, or durability. This was odd. The range of quirks in this class seemed to be quite widespread. How was someone whose quirk made them invisible supposed to compete against Katsuki in a test like this? The blast from Katsuki's explosion effectively grounded him again. It's important to know one's limits. That's a rational method to find out what kind of heroes you'll be. Aizawa held up the device in his hand. 709, 8 meters. Awesome. We'll get to use our quirks. The hero department of UA is great. This'll be fun. At the last comment, Aizawa smiled. Instantly, everyone fell quiet. Aizawa Shota had the most evil smile most of them had ever seen. The aura their homeroom teacher emanated was downright demonic. Fun, you say? You hope to become heroes, an aim for which you only have 3 years to achieve, and you think it'll be fun? Now the class had started to physically back up, as their teacher's aura changed from merely dangerous to borderline psychotic. All right then, he announced. The one with the lowest score in all 8 disciplines will be considered hopeless and be expelled. At that, most of the students screamed something akin to WH80. But Izuku had understood it right now. Your fates are in our hands. Welcome to Hell, also known as the Hero Course at UA High. But that's not fair. It's the first day of school. Yes, that was it. Natural disasters, highway pileups, rampaging villains. Calamity is always right around the corner. I'd say that Japan is full of unfair things. Heroes are the ones who correct all that unfairness. If you were hoping to slack off here, I'm not sorry at all when I say this. For the next 3 years, UA will put you through the ringer. The test wasn't fair. It wasn't designed to be fair. It was designed to assess their creativity and flexibility. They wanted to know how well they could use their quirks in an adverse environment, and if they knew when to drop it. So it wasn't just the last one who would be judged hopeless. Everyone who didn't show enough potential was out. Izuku readied himself. The main problem was that applying one for all would be a no-go, since he still hadn't managed to control the power output satisfactorily. If he used it without having adapted at least something with the hardness grade of iron, he would either injure himself or even risk that his limbs splintered if he used wood, for example. So he'd have to rely on matter adaptation for this one. 50-meter dash. Izuku watched the other students with a hint of unease. His own quirk was quite versatile, but it wasn't cut out for these disciplines like Ida's engine or Ishido's acid. Never mind. He at least had something that vaguely resembled a strategy, if you squinted. So when he and Katsuki were next, he adapted the rubber of his shoes in his legs in hopes to get a head start, bouncing off the starting block like a rubber ball. 5.23 seconds the training robot squawked. Izuku sighed with relief. Not too bad. Grip strength. He knew that some students had quirks that made this test easy for them, but come on. Shoji Mizo had used his dupli arms to get 540 kilograms. Yayoro Momo had actually created a hydraulic press for this test. And, oddly enough, the skinny Tokoyami Fumikage had somehow managed 313 kilograms without breaking a sweat. Izuku, however, had doffed his shoes for this one. Yes, he knew it looked silly. Thank you very much, Kaken, and adapted the concrete of the floor. Should he use one for all? No. If he rendered his hand useless now, he wouldn't stand a chance with ball throwing or seated toe touch. So he just used his concrete strengthened hand and got 104 kilograms out of it. That was pretty decent. Standing long jump. While Izuku couldn't hope to fly past the grove like the pint-sized Mineta Minoru, who made some sort of trampoline out of his hairballs, or Shiro Hanta, who had shot tape out of his elbows to a nearby tree and then hauled it in again while jumping, his rubber technique did serve him well once more, getting something just over 4 meters. Side-to-side stepping. He wouldn't talk about this. Ever again. Ball throw. Uraraka Ochako's infinity was somewhat exaggerated, but well, this really was her discipline. Also Kota Koji, who seemed to be more on the quiet side, somehow persuaded a bird to fly away with the ball, resulting in a 4-digit score. Izuku had strengthened himself by adapting the material of the floor, but there wasn't much more he would be able to do. So he just awaited his turn, readied himself for the throw, when suddenly his arm changed back into default mode. Izuku looked at his limb in confusion. What? But I adapt. I erased your quirk, Aizawa stated tersely. The students were in perturbation almost instantly. What? Erased? But how? I know who he is. Those goggles. He's the erasure hero, Eraserhead. Eraserhead? Oh, right. An angler-type hero who avoids the media presence. But what did he do wrong? Yeah, so far it all went smooth. What you are doing is not rational, Aizawa interrupted. He seemed annoyed. Or rather, more annoyed than before. Your quirk description states that it is also possible for you to unleash a significant force in addition to matter adaptation. You did not make use of this skill once so far. Take this seriously, Midoriya Izuku. Aizawa came closer and spoke softer. Your reckless attitude is exactly why I voted for you to get 0 rescue points at the entrance exam. Find a way around your self-destructive tendencies, or quit. Meanwhile, the extras were chatting excitedly about the revelation that Deku's quirk included strength augmentation. Katsuki looked at him intensely. Don't you dare to fuck up here, Deku. Don't. You. Dare. Wait, so he basically has 2 quirks? So manly. That's broken. Physical power and this rare adaptation quirk. Izuku felt indeed broken. This was bad. If he tried using one for all while only having adapted the floor's material, without being able to modulate it. No, that was not even an option, and there was no way he'd be lucky enough to manage it at this instant. But if he didn't pull it off, Aizawa would be fast to expel him since he hadn't used his quirk's potential to the fullest, which was what this test was all about. So what to do now? He couldn't fail, not like this. He couldn't have his hero career cut short before it had even begun. Wait. Izuku casted his mind back to the first time he'd tried and used one for all. At that moment, he had. Yes, that was the solution. Izuku adapted once more, channeled one for all, electricity prickling under his skin. Only in the finger, and wham. The pain really was nothing in comparison to what he'd experienced at the entrance exam. Granted, his muscles were still ruptured, and of course it still hurt, but it was only the tissue of his finger, not his whole arm. He deactivated his quirk. Okay, he took it back. Now it hurt. The concrete hadn't been strong enough, apparently, and subsequently splintered. For 23, 8 meters. What? Okay, that's just unfa. Wait, look. Aizawa examined Izuku, who clutched his maltreated finger and raised an eyebrow. What is this? Izuku clenched his fist. Quick, a subterfuge. It happens. If I use the boost without a material strong enough to back it up. In that case, the backlash disrupts the material and I get injured. That's why I only used it in my finger and only adapted the concrete in bones and joints. Aizawa looked at him, expression inscrutable. Izuku squinted under his piercing glare. Well then, next one. Just like that. While Mineta went for his turn, Izuku found himself surrounded by a crowd of excited students. I'm Kirishima Ijiro. Your quirk is totally manly. Aren't combinations like that said to be really scarce? Damn, you got lucky. Indeed, Midoriya-san, you can be proud of your efforts. You will surely make a great hero one day. Weren't you in that one video with the sludge? Alright, shut it. Get your heads out of his ass already and try to stop being such fucking lickspittles. Izuku wasn't sure if Katsuki had just reacted on the mention of the sludge villain, but he was grateful nonetheless. While he had nothing against his new classmates so far, some of them were pretty energetic, and he had his hands full with Katsuki as it was. Some students, though, did not participate in the cheering. They were just in the back seats and watched. Endurance running. Izuku most definitely didn't excel in this one. The pain was distracting, and his quirk could only do so much when it came to endurance. He placed somewhere in the middle of the class. His stamina was decent, but he didn't stand a chance against Todoroki Shoto, who changed his run into a skate, or Sato Rikido, who was absurdly fast after having ingested noticeable amounts of sweets. Upper body strength. Not much to say about this one, though he was definitely better now that the pain had subsided somewhat. Also, there weren't many students whose quirks supported them here, and changing his body into concrete definitely helped. Seated toe touch. While the bludgeoned finger made this one especially painful, this was a test that did fit Izuku. Fabric and rubber were both perfect for the job. Alright. After the last event, Aizawa had them all gather together again and stated, Since there's no time to waste, I won't bother to explain all of the results in detail. So here's just a list with the final rankings. The list appeared, and Izuku searched for his name. I'm 8th? Damn, you beat me. The red-haired Kirishima stated good-humoredly. Close 1 Midoriyakin. Izuku nodded dazedly, glad that he took it so well. Kirishima seemed really likable and was super friendly. Even Kaken had only yelled at him 2 times during the test. At last place was a miserable Mineta Minoru, who'd started wailing once he'd seen his placement win. Also, I was lying about expelling someone. It was a rational deception to bring out the best in you. Iya? That's unbecoming for a teacher of the prestigious UA. We shouldn't need such cheap persuasion methods. Ida complained. Is it? I can still change my mind. No, Mineta shouted anxiously. We're all perfectly fine with the rational deception. Izuku looked at Katsuki, who just shrugged. So he'd figured it out too, as opposed to some of the other students. The invisible Hagakure at place 19 seemed quite relieved, too. Well then, go home, everyone. We're finished here. Grab a timetable in the class if you feel like it. Midoriya, go see Recovery Girl. It's not going to be easier from here. And Todoroki, come to the staff room in 20 minutes. I'd like to have a chat with you. After that, Aizawa retreated into his sleeping bag again and lay down in the middle of the schoolyard. When Izuku came back, dog-tired, Recovery Girl's Quirk was great and gross, but most noticeably draining. He was surprised. In front of the schoolyard, he found Ida and Katsuki waiting for him, arguing about Katsuki's choice of words, which Ida thought was improper for an aspiring hero. The indigo-haired boy apparently had waited to ask about his finger and to bring him his timetable, while Katsuki, either he was here because of Izuku, or just because he enjoyed spiting Ida. Izuku was happy nonetheless. April 10th, 20XX, first official day of school. 12:41 at UA High School, lunch break. Katsuki had successfully managed to blow most of the numbskulls trying to sit with them off, stating that he had little use for extras who just wanted to get to them after seeing their strength. Deku had fussed about him, not even bothering to try socializing, and invited the guy with the stupid red hair and that invisible girl to their table. The former was something akin to a social landmine. He got you before you even noticed him, cracking stupid jokes and talking about manliness, his favorite word, whatever, and generally emitting an insufferable amount of friendliness. The latter was more like a conversation ninja. He knew she was there, sitting with them and making her idiotic, exaggerated movements while talking in an obnoxious volume, and he still let his guard down while she somehow managed to be likable. He was okay with them, he guessed. Izuku was sort of relieved that Katsuki had accepted their classmates to some extent. The blonde had never pulled his punches when it came to their class in Aldera Middle School, and he'd been anxious that Katsuki's irascible nature would cause everyone to avoid them. Thank heaven for Kirishima. That guy was scarily easy to talk to. Which hero is your favorite? The aforementioned asked, demonstrating his value as a conversation inductor. Mine's definitely Crimson Riot. Some say he's outdated, but he became a hero with a plain hardening quirk as mine, and he's the man I want to be like. My idol is All Might. Izuku answered brightly. A selfless, intrepid hero who saves anyone with a smile. That's what I want to become too. He chose to let it go unmentioned that All Might was also a skeleton that occasionally coughed up blood like a defect fireplug. Yeah, All Might is pretty great too. Kirishima agreed with a radiant smile. I still have trouble to believe we'll have him as a teacher in less than an hour. So manly. You know that you made 23 manly illusions in the last 12 minutes? Hagakure giggled. But, hey Bakugo-kun, hey. What? Katsuki's expression promised bloodlust. Who do you like best? I wonder. As Hagakure seemed to be completely unfazed by Katsuki, Izuku pondered if it were just people with zero self-preservation instincts who became friends with him. How can you even fucking ask, Invisibit? Kaken. Invisibinch. Just so you know it, I'm currently pouting. He also admires All Might a great deal, Izuku explained and deftly avoided a slap to the back of his head. We also both like Edshot, Snatch, and Gen. Right then, he remembered again that Gentle A was not a pro-hero, but probably something like a vigilante or just a random person, and B had asked them to withhold his role in the lime incident. Fortunately, Kirishima was too friendly to inquire further, and Hagakure was too energetic to ask about a blooper. While the latter talked about a heroine named Shroud, who, after a random encounter, had inspired her to become a heroine herself, Izuku thought about Gentle. He'd never heard anything of the man ever again, even though he'd went through the internet several times hoping to find a bit of information. Maybe he'd just gone back to whatever he'd done before he saved them. Maybe he had emigrated or, honestly, he didn't know. He did, however, still admire him. His childlike neurons had branded Gentle as the first hero he'd ever seen in action with his own eyes, and that it had been him he'd saved just fueled his enthusiasm. Katsuki saw it similarly, though he'd blow up his tongue before admitting it. I'm so curious about All Might as a teacher. I mean, it totally blindsided me when he suddenly appeared on the projector, you know? Hagakure seemed quite vibrant, gesticulating with her whole body. She could give Ida a run for his money, while theorizing about All Might in class. Bakugo rolled his eyes before starting to pour ridiculous amounts of hot sauce over his rice. Dude, Kirishima exclaimed, just what are your intestines made of? I heard it can dissolve your stomach lining to eat that much chili. Don't worry about it, Izuku reassured him. It's some sort of side effect of his quirk. It makes him even more tolerant to spicy food than his mother. He'll be okay. Kirishima looked at him incredulously. Are you saying his own mother fed him that hellish? On second thought, I think I don't want to know. Anyways, Shroud, wait, are you still not done with the sauce? Look at your rice. It's nearly as red as my hair now. No way you'll be able to eat this and do All Might's training afterward. Katsuki looked up at him, and a feral grin sprouted over his face. Did you just challenge me, shitty hair? Kakin, Izuku moaned. For the last time, couldn't you at least give it a try and remember some of our classmates' names? We'll train with them for 3 years now, and probably work alongside them afterwards. There's no reason to make ourselves unpopular. Don't worry, I'm used to being overlooked, Hagakure chuckled, though it contained a tiny dash of sadness. Plus, we've only known each other for 1 day by now, Kirishima added, blissfully oblivious. I don't know all the names of our classmates either right now. Now will you all shut the fuck up and eat your grub? You're a pain in the ass. Besides, I didn't even ask one of you to sit with me, so what y'all doing here anyway? Izuku's sweat dropped. Obviously Katsuki had decided to just use his usual socializing strategy, if it could even be called one. Simple. Kirishima laughed. Same hairstyle. Katsuki looked at him with his, are you fucking kidding me? Expression. I'm here because Izuku said it would be funny. The glare Katsuki gave Izuku was nothing short of menacing. He was right. Izuku was only able to dodge Katsuki's fist because the boy had hesitated a split second to decide if he should hit him or Hagakure first. Truth be told, Izuku had also asked those two in particular because they seemed like they wouldn't mind Katsuki's belligerent attitude all that much. Now that I think about it, Hagakure inquired, your finger is already healed. How'd you manage that? So Izuku started to explain Recovery Girl's quirk with enthusiasm, rushing over the three with his vast fanboy knowledge until Kirishima looked at his clock with a hint of worry. By the way, guys, we got 12 minutes left and not one of us has even started to eat yet. 1319 at Classroom 1A. I am here, coming through the door like a normal person. Instantly, everyone ceased the chattering and bantering when Japan's #1 hero, All Might, paraded through the door in the most not normal way they'd ever seen. Oh my. So cool. He, All Might, the symbol of peace, is going to teach us. I shall do my very best. He's drawn so different than the rest of us. Makes me kinda jealous. And it's his Silver Age costume, too. I've got 3 trading cards with that one. This is the very costume in which All Might defeated Crustfall. Its fabric consists of 36% co. Shut up, Deku. Katsuki rolled his eyes. Honestly, it wasn't like it was the first time they got to know that All Might would be a teacher here, so the critters could get a goddamn hold on themselves. Kakin. All right, Plasma, wait, what? He had developed some sort of inner Deku? Fuck. Anyway, if this happened every time they had All Might as a teacher, Katsuki was bound to explode. Deku had already been grating on his nerves in present mixed class, and he'd had 10 months to get used to having a hero as a teacher. "It is indeed me," All Might exclaimed. That was the exact same thing he'd said to them at Dagoba Beach. Must be his standard answer for it's All Might. Basic hero training, All Might exclaimed while striking a dramatic pose. This class will put you through all sorts of special training to mold you into heroes. That was what the fucking name of the course said. The real deal, that had preyed on Katsuki's mind right from the beginning, was what they'd do. No time to dally. Today's activity is going to be dramatic pause. This one, battle training. Instantly, Katsuki's mood lifted considerably. 13:30 at Training Ground Beta. Of course they were excited. Hell, even he himself, the #1 hero, All Might, had been excited when he'd put on his costume the very first time. Good students they would be. A varied mix of personalities, backgrounds, interests, and, of course, quirks. And most of the students were dressed appropriately to fit those. While he was aware of the dangers of favoritism, he couldn't help but look out for the two boys he'd trained for the last 10 months. The two of them had truly thrived, though he quickly noticed that they were both prone to overexhausting themselves, which had led to reprimands on his part more than once. He'd have to keep an eye on that. Eventually, both of them emerged from the tunnel, young Bakugo trailing young Midoriya behind. They were both commanding figures in their costumes, All Might had to admit. Young Bakugo sported a military-style wand, with prominent gauntlets segmented into 3 shell-like objects on either hand, giving off a menacing vibe that fit his disposition rather well, unfortunately. Young Midoriya's costume came as a surprise, though. The boy sported a style similar to a fantasy novel character, clad in black-brown leather armor with golden rims and sparingly distributed green ornaments that formed entwined structures. It made him appear like an assassin from the pre-Quirk era, especially when allowing for the classic hood and the mask that covered the lower half of his face, both together leaving blank nothing but his eyes. He even wore dark gloves and high boots. There was barely any skin exposed at all. The only thing thwarting the picture was the vibrant green pattern on the breastplate, which resembled an atom, hinting at the true nature of his quirk. All Might was relieved when the two of them were congratulated for their costumes, despite the efforts young Bakugo made to deter everyone. In any case, he was a teacher now. He had to make sure they all got the best education he could manage and leave a good first impression, too. So he broke away from his musings and announced more boisterously than he felt like. "Shall we begin, my wards?" Izuku shivered with excitement. His first basic hero training lesson. His first time in his costume. The first time he'd experienced the daily life of a hero course student and All Might as a teacher. What would it be? A hostage situation? Intelligence gathering? Group fights? Deduction training? Sensei, Ida's costume strongly reminded Izuku of another hero. Which one was it again? The engines, the futuristic style. This appears to be the same field used in the entrance exam. Will we once again perform the cityscape maneuver? All Might shook his head. An appealing idea, young Ida, but in these days, the truly intelligent, outrageous villains appear indoors. Black market dealings, schemes, conspiracies, events far more dangerous than mere robberies or theft. Therefore, today's training will focus on indoor, anti-personnel battles, in groups of 2. Wait, no basic training beforehand. The best training is, and will remain the praxis. Instantly, the class burst into chatter, while some people started getting together in pairs. What determines victory? Can I just blow everyone away? Kaken. Will we be expelled if our performance isn't good enough, like Aizawa-sensei threatened? How do we proceed to divide ourselves into teams? Isn't my cape just fabulous? All Might was taken aback at the sheer number of questions raining down on him. Would he have to do this before each lesson? It was like giving an interview to 5 parties at once, that is. I will explain the victory conditions in a second. Blowing anyone away is strictly prohibited. In my class, no one will be expelled. I believe in the determination of everyone who made it this far. The team division is going to be determined by chance, and your cape is indeed highly fashionable. Pardon my bluntness, Sensei, but is by chance really the best way to predefine the teams? But if you're an actual hero, you won't always be able to work with the ones you can cooperate with best, right? Izuku objected. More often than not, Heroes have to join forces with random colleagues who happen to be nearby, so the purpose is probably to prepare ourselves for off-the-cuff decisions. I see. Forgive my ignorance. All Might laughed reassuringly and produced the boxes for the lots. All right then, shall we? Everyone tensed in anticipation. And our teams are the following, All Might proclaimed. Team A, Kaminari Denki and Bakugo Katsuki. Team B, Yaoyorozu Momo and Mineta Minoru. Team C, Azui Tsuyu and Shoji Mizo. Team D, Sato Rikido and Ishido Mina. Team E, Midoriya Izuku and Tokoyami Fumikichi. Team F, Kota Koji and Ojiro Mashireo. Team G, Jiro Kyoka and Kirishima Ijiro. Team H, Shiro Hanta and Uraraka Achiko. Team I, Aoyama Yuga and Ida Tenya. Team J, Hagakure Turu and Todoroki Shoto. Now for the matchups. For our first round, we have Team E as the villains versus Team J as the heroes. As All Might continued announcing the matchups, Midoriya gulped nervously as he met the clinical stare of the half-cold, half-hot user. Match 1. Midoriya Izuku and Tokoyami Fumikichi as the villains versus Todoroki Shoto and Hagakure Turu as the heroes. Everyone watched in anticipation as Midoriya and Tokoyami entered the building. 5 minutes until the heroes set foot in the base. Izuku was tense, not only because his partner seemed to be on an even keel and he didn't want to blow the exercise, but also because of the look in Todoroki's eyes, devoid of any emotion, like a hawk fixing its gaze on a rabbit. It was the epitome of superiority, the eyes of someone who was absolutely certain of victory. Well then, surprised, Izuku glanced at his partner. Tokoyami didn't look at him as he spoke. We shall brace ourselves for the upcoming storm. What do you propose? Izuku blinked. He'd never encountered someone who spoke like this. Not even Ida came close. He began eloquently. Well, so, your quirk? What is it? Some sort of strength enhancement? Probably, but I didn't really see that much of it. Your skin changed color, and I regret to inform you that you were afflicted with a misunderstanding. Tokoyami interrupted as courteously as possible. My quirk is a sentient beast of shadows, dwelling in my innermost part. If released, it is forsooth a force to be reckoned with. You bet I am. Midoriya yelped. He yelped. In front of a classmate. Damn it. And looked at the creature that had suddenly manifested between them. Name's Dark Shadow. I'm your third man in this. Thou art worlds apart from being a man, for thou art not even human. Blah blah. Spoil sport. Those two were the strangest duo Izuku had ever encountered, and he'd known Katsuki for pretty much his whole life. Be that as it may, now he had a starting point, and he'd literally spent years discussing strategies and situations with his explosive friend exactly for moments like this. So his mind started developing a policy, suddenly devoid of any embarrassment or anxiety. My notes on indoor fighting. Hero strategies for the future, NR 4. Alright, how strong is your quirk at maximum? Does it have any weak points? Can you two communicate telepathically? How fast is it? Can it change size or shape? Tokoyami probably had the best poker face in the world, but somehow his expression delivered the spirit of a raised eyebrow. Then, he began answering his questions in his quite roundabout way, with Dark Shadow breaking in on him to add something from time to time. Together, they devised a strategy. And after that, the match began. Start. Shoto didn't waste any time in acting. He simply told Hagakure to step back before touching the wall. Instantaneously, ice spread from his hand, rapidly starting to cover the building and everything in it. It barely took 10 seconds before each and every room was coated, except for one. Shoto frowned. That hadn't been part of the plan. It seemed like their opponents had managed to prevent the bomb from getting frozen, which meant they'd expected his attack to some degree. Hagakure looked at him, probably. Now, her voice betrayed her dissatisfaction over his solo action, but also awe. Of course. Since Shoto was sour from both of their adversaries somehow avoiding his attack, he regarded her with a chilling look. They escaped. Oh, now the invisible girl seemed really annoyed. Perfect. Shoto was on the brink on losing his temper when he asked, "What do you mean?" through gritted teeth. What I mean, she answered snippily, is that either you unfreeze the floor, or I'll have to go inside with shoes on, which would pretty much negate the advantage I have when it comes to getting to the bomb. Shoto clenched his fists. She was right. That girl, who, judging by her efforts in class so far, was most likely less intelligent than him by a considerable margin, was right. He hadn't shown enough foresight. Shoto unfroze the floor. As they stepped in, he explained which room had been the one he'd been unable to freeze while she doffed gloves and shoes. I'll get their attention. While I engage them, your job is it to get up and secure the bomb. Hagakure nodded and said yes after Shoto got impatient. Good. Then all that's left. At that moment, a dark blur shot towards them from a side corridor, crashing into him and hurling him to the other side of the room. Midoriya? But how? He should have been frozen if he'd been so near. Then Shoto saw the hole in the ceiling. So they made arrangements? Shoto got up, ready to attack, when he saw the dark-clad boy exchanging quick blows with Hagakure, who seemed unable to damage him even with her invisibility. This meant using ice on him wasn't an option, too risky with a naked comrade nearby. So Shoto did the logical thing and jumped at the chance to get up to the third floor, where the bomb was. After all, he had a special advantage against that particular student. Target building, the basement monitor room. Whoa, that was quick. Definitely unexpected. How did he pull that off? So now it's down to 2 onion-owned fights? But Todorokikin is a monster. I mean, no offense, but do any of you actually think Tokoyamakin stands a chance? He does. Everyone turned around to Bakugo, who'd answered on Uraraka's question. How do you know? Kirishima asked in surprise. Bakugo didn't seem to be the type of man who said things like that just because his friend was fighting. "'Cause icy hot, and invisi. Hagakure are suckers for his plan." Katsuki smirked. "If Deku has the initiative, you're fucked. And that fight's the damn paragon of initiative. Just look, he's already fighting the more dangerous one." "What? Hagakure-chan is more dangerous than Todorokikin?" Kaminari asked, flummoxed. "Of course she is." Katsuki barked content when the idiot shut his mouth. "She's fucking invisible. If they'd let her get away, she'd get to the bomb for sure, imbecile." He looked back at the monitor, where Deku was still in that ridiculous fist fight. He'll end it any second now that Icy Hot's too far away. "You mean he's toying with her?" Shiro asked quizzically. "Doesn't look like it." "Please," Katsuki groaned, starting to seriously question this class intelligence. "I've known Deku since we were old enough for our mothers to arrange it. He spent years collecting all that nerd knowledge in that big brain of his. And we both spent the same years beating the shit out of each other so we could get stronger. No way in hell he'd fight that pathetically unless it's for a plan." That shut up the other idiots, and they looked back at the screen. At the third floor, the hallway quickly became bone-chilling cold as a now thoroughly annoyed Shoto stopped in front of the second door. Those two actually managed to irritate him. Well, mostly Midoriya, though if Hagakure still managed to detain him, he obviously proved to be less of an obstacle than he'd initially thought. Anyway, their plan was bound to fail. Shoto opened the door and stepped in. That was his first mistake, he realized, as soon as he took in his surroundings in the pitch-black room. Their opponents had blanketed the windows. Shoto got a glimpse at Tokoyami, who stood in the center of the room, before the door slammed shut. "My regards to thee, hero. Behold, for this shall be thy remembrance ceremony." At the main floor, Izuku smiled when he heard Tokoyami say the keyword. Now he had to be fast. Hydrolysis. Toru in the meantime was getting frustrated. She was invisible, so Izuku at least had a hard time actually hitting her. But that didn't really matter, as he'd somehow not only transformed his body, but also his clothing into some kind of foam, which rendered all her punches useless. And Izuku himself had only used his normal fists. He held back so obviously that she was on the verge of tears. Then he smiled, and everything went downhill from there. For starters, her next punch went into liquid. Liquid. She yelped and yanked her hand back, only to have it surrounded by something heavy. Appalled, she looked at her hand that was suddenly encased in metal and very visible. Then Izuku's punch hit her. He'd still not transformed his fists, damn it, and hurled her against the wall. In a daze, she only noticed the capture tape around her arm peripherally. Izuku sighed and clutched his side while running up the stairs. Hero Team, Hagakure, captured. All Might proudly announced in the background. Izuku paid him no mind. He hadn't heard anything from Tokoyami, and that meant something had gone wrong. At the third floor, Shoto reacted quickly. One mental command and ice surrounded him, mere moments before an incredible force slammed into it. He crashed into the door and leapt aside as the same force hit it with an audible bang, then got up and adopted a fighting stance, breathing rapidly. He didn't know what Tokoyami was capable of. He only knew that if he wanted to act, he had to do it now. I know your face. That made an impact. Shoto could sense the moment of hesitation before a giant something tried to grab him, making him stagger back. I shall be honored for someone with a name as fabled as yours to acknowledge someone as caddish as mice. None of that. I know your face. The Shizuoka 7. The attack stopped. You'd have been number 8, if not for my old man. I'm somewhat grateful for that incident, actually. I can hardly remember an event that infuriated him as much as that one. I must ask you to refrain from pursuing further. Tokoyami's voice sounded somewhat strained. Shoto all but smiled. So he was right. He had actually enrolled at UA. He would have felt sympathy with him. Their circumstances were awfully similar. But right now, it was an opportunity too good to not be seized. So he continued conversationally. I wonder how it must feel for you. So many efforts to conceal everything. And then you meet me at school, of all people. So far and no further, Tokoyami's voice resonated in the room, somewhat distorted. I cannot guarantee for thy. What do you think they'll say as soon as they find it out? Cease. Give up. Hero Team, Hagakure, captured. What? Damn. If Midoriya came up here and paired up with Tokoyami's mysterious strength, he had to end this as quickly as possible. So he crossed the boundary. No one will ever acknowledge you again. You will be alone. I'm not even sure if they'd let you continue at UA if they find out about this. Stop. Panic. Mild, but panic nonetheless. He had him. Suddenly, the door crashed open. 3 things happened at once. First, Midoriya came rushing in, body and clothing transformed into solid diamond. Second, Shoto created an ice wall to protect himself. Third, Shoto caught a glimpse of Tokoyami and ossified. Behind the bird-headed teen, the shadows danced. It was as if the darkness itself had consolidated and was lashing out with dozens of jet-black tendrils, twirling around and seeping through the gloom. Neither liquid nor solid, just a minatory accumulation of tenebrous appendages, watching them with 2 threatening, orange eyes. That was Tokoyami's quirk? Slowly, the beast shriveled to a more docile form, while Tokoyami gave him the most menacing, stone-cold glare he'd ever received, even if taking his father into account. Well, are you still keen to betray my secret? He said, his voice making his skin crawl. Now that you have borne witness to my burden? Shoto was thunderstruck. He hadn't anticipated anything even remotely close to this. Tokoyami's eyes went from downright disturbing to a mere unsettling. Then, shall we proceed? Before Shoto could react, a diamond fist crushed through the ice wall and grazed his side. The force behind it was enough to send him back staggering, right in the arms of the shadow beast. Only a quick ice pillar prevented the fight from being over. Midoriya jumped up to him, faster than he could comprehend. Todoroki was forced to leap down again, where he had to avoid Tokoyami's quirk. This was their plan, he realized, aghast. They created a situation in which I was separated from Hagakure. Then Midoriya waited with defeating her until I was within Tokoyami's clasp, to make sure I wouldn't try and fight Midoriya first. They arranged it so that they hold all the aces. And now I'm fighting them simultaneously. But he was also inside of the room now, and that meant it isn't over yet. Shoto froze the room as fast as possible. Floor, walls, and ceiling were almost instantly covered in ice, which made them slippery and turned the tide in his favor. While neither of his opponents had been directly hit, their mobility was clearly impaired. Now for the difficult part, Tokoyami's quirk was wrapped around the bomb. The form was grotesque under shadowy beast, but it was most definitely the bomb, and truly bothersome. He had to get Tokoyami out of the way. Shoto slid over the ice with years of practice to back him up, though Midoriya followed him with surprising agility. The shadow beast formed a shield around Tokoyami, making Shoto TSK in annoyance. From the floor arose an ice wall that separated the room and would hopefully ensure that Midoriya didn't get in the way. Then Shoto started his attack. He soon found out that however this quirk worked, it didn't tire. He attacked it again and again, freezing larger and larger parts of the room, but without any apparent effect. It just lashed out, completely unfazed by his skill and strength, while he lost more and more precious time. I should be superior. Why wasn't he? He'd nearly had him beforehand. But that monstrosity was something he didn't want to risk invoking again. And at the same time, he had to constantly renew his ice barrier to make sure Midoriya didn't get to them. If that happened, the fight was pretty much over. Then, finally, a slip-up. For a short moment, Tokoyami's defense had budged in the course of a counterattack. It was now or never. Shoto vaulted over the bird-headed teen with an ice pillar, touched his back, and froze him. Before the shadow beast could destroy the ice, he'd wrapped the capture tape around his arm. Villain team, Tokoyami, captured. Tokoyami looked at him in surprise. Then he sighed and started hauling his quirk in. Shoto doubled his efforts to make sure the ice barrier wouldn't budge, not now, while Tokoyami unveiled the bomb. It wasn't there. Unbelieving, he stared at the cavity in the shadows that by all means should have contained the bomb, except it didn't. Tokoyami smiled. If thy superior opponent decides to yield, thou shalt question yourself. Otherwise, thou might reduce yourself to a mere pawn on his chessboard. And which strategist would trade the queen for a pawn? Shoto looked at him with barely sustained fury. They foresaw it. They planned all of this in advance, and I took the bait like an idiot. Time's up. The villain team, Wyans. Shoto fell down on his knees, panting, while Tokoyami's quirk broke up the ice cocoon. You are upon conscience a devastating opponent. I shall try and bear you no ill will, for you merely did what you considered necessary in order to achieve victory. But be cognizant of me pardoning you this time does neither mean I will forget it nor that I will forgive you if you decide to retry this ever again. Target building, the basement monitor room. All Might would have lied if he'd claimed to not have been a little biased, but as it had turned out, he'd been right. Wow, okay, that was just wow. Zero seemed to have lost his ability to speak coherently. Bakugo looked like the cat that ate the canary. His whole posture just screamed, I fucking said you so, and that way of talking was something they'd need to address eventually. Kinda annoying that it was too dark to see that part before Midoriya arrived, though. Kaminari said disappointedly. Okay, but how did they manage to get the bomb away? A confused Mineta asked. Maybe Tokoyami gave it to Midoriya while he fought Todoroki? Uraraka opined. It was just so fast. Speaking of Midoriya, his performance was sorta weird, right? Kaminari stated. I mean, after Tokoyami had Todoroki cornered, Hagakure didn't stand a chance. How did he pull that manacle off, anyway? And then after Todoroki made that ice wall, he just punched it a few times. How about we wait to hear it from them personally? Suddenly, everyone agreed. Being All Might had its advantages. Todoroki was the first one who entered the room. He didn't speak, didn't react to anyone, didn't acknowledge the presence of his classmates in any way, shape, or form. He just came in, stopped dead exactly 4 meters away from everyone else, and looked at the wall. His expression was perfectly smooth and stoic, not moving a muscle while his classmates barraged him with questions. The second one entering was Hagakure, who seemed disappointed about her defeat, but conveyed it to everyone by gesticulating in the most expressive way possible for someone of whom only the gloves and shoes were visible to others. She abundantly came forth about Midoriya being a total kick-ass who she didn't stand a ghost of a chance against. This led to a quite flustered Deku keeping after her and trying to convince her to cease her lavish praising. Katsuki smirked upon seeing him now being the one surrounded by gushing classmates, leading to him accidentally adapting copper in his eyebrows. So the costume really was as great as he'd requested. He just knew Deku would want to discuss this as soon as the fights were over. Speaking of which, number 4 entered the room. Somehow the guy who had a fucking bird's head still managed to look mysterious and graceful. even if he was shorter than him by at least 10 centimeters. Katsuki wasn't sure if he liked that one. However, he did respect strength. And if his display against Todoroki was anything to go by, he had a good deal of that. Suddenly, Bird Boy returned his gaze with piercing red, and an overwhelming sense of doom flushed over him, making him cringe slightly. In that moment, Katsuki came to a realization. Firstly, that guy was neither calm nor sedate. He was angry and frightened, and he only managed to hide that by overwhelming self-composure. Katsuki had a bad temper. He knew that, and while he strictly refused anger management crap, Deku still impressed as much shit as possible on him, and he probably drew 1 or 2 lessons out of that. At least enough to deduce something out of his demeanor. That bird was in a turmoil of emotions, and Katsuki didn't know why. Tagakami or something like that. What the fuck is up with you? Katsuki was sure he had been serene, much less agitated for sure, before the fight, during the first half of the fight, and then that episode no one had gotten to see, in the blackened room. There is something about this one, something that doesn't feel right. It suddenly seemed as if Katsuki had found the most dangerous of his new classmates. Well then, shall we proceed with the battle analysis? Everyone seemed to be okay with that, though when All Might asked so, can anyone explain the villain team's strategy? It took a long time until someone raised their hand. Truth be told, Katsuki did have an idea of what Deku had pulled off, but he figured he didn't count since they'd mulled over siege tactics since they were 10. Finally, it was some girl with the spikiest ponytail Katsuki had ever seen who wanted to have a try at analyzing. Well, the most important factor in their plan obviously was to separate Todoroki and Hagekure. In order to achieve that, they prepared both the room in which Tokoyami waited, so that he or the bomb wouldn't be as easy to spot, and broke holes into the floors to expand their mobility. That was the only way for Midoriya to ambush them like that. He waited in the darkened room until the ice covered anything, likely for the purpose of lulling them into a sense of security. Then he exploited the short argument between Hagekure and Todoroki to get into a good position. As soon as Todoroki unfroze the room, Midoriya attacked him and pretended to struggle against Hagekure, since she, as Bakugo-san pointed out already, was the more dangerous of the two in this exercise. Everyone watched her flawless critique with awe. Todoroki correctly concluded that he couldn't use ice attacks as long as he had an invisible comrade fighting, who would have reacted unfavorably with such a drop in temperature. He then proceeded to get up without paying any mind to their fight, as it seemed to him that Hagekure could contain Midoriya. Todoroki regarded her with the look, but she remained unfazed. Todoroki, being extremely capable in fighting, was confident that he would manage to subdue Tokoyami, which indicates that he didn't comprehend the villain team's strategy. Instead, he started to fight Tokoyami. While we were unable to watch the actual battle, he seemed weakened afterwards, by which we can deduce that the discrepancy he imagined between them was not as clear as he believed it to be. Seriously, which of you is the teacher? All Might himself was at a bit of a loss himself, and didn't say anything. Concerning the fight between Hagekure and Midoriya, I noticed that Midoriya's costume seemed to have a special feature. Is that correct? A feature? Ashido asked in surprise. Okay, now I'm interested. Come on, Midoriya, spill it. Well, Izuku said self-consciously, with all eyes suddenly being on him. You see, well, what was up with him? He just won his match. He shouldn't be this nervous. Well, he was going to have a talk later on. Midoriya, I owe you an explanation and an apology. I would like to request a rendezvous after school. You may bring with you whoever you'd like to, should it set your mind at ease. You gonna tell us? Kirishima asked good-naturedly. I mean, I'm cool with it if you want to have it as a secret weapon or something, but… Oh, no, I mean, of course yes. Izuku hastened to get a hold on himself. He also removed his mask because it muffled his voice somewhat. Well, my quirk works by changing my cells into a different material. The requirement for that is that I touch it. I don't have something like memory cells for it, so I can only copy the molecular makeup if I have physical contact. Katsuki would have face-bombed like Deku got into the habit of doing, but he'd learned years before that that was a bad idea given the traits of his sweat. Still, Deku and quirks. So, When I requested my hero costume, I needed two things. Firstly, on the inner surface I have plates of 19 different materials that directly touch my skin. So you have something like your personal adaptation arsenal with you? Kaminari asked interestedly. I'm surprised that you were the first one who noticed that. Jiro deadpanned. Kaminari started complaining while Izuku continued. The second thing I applied for was that my costume would be able to mimic my matter adaptation. Instantly, everyone shut up. Then, what? Wait, your costume has a quirk? Kaminari asked. Jiro pierced him with her earphone jack. Of course not, idiot. But how did they do that? Toru asked. She still had the manacle around her hand and felt pretty uncomfortable with it. Seriously, it was way heavier than it looked like. I mean, a quirk like that has its limit. It doesn't just apply on your costume as well. Yaoyorozu smiled. It's made out of your hair, right, Midoriya-san? Izuku nodded. Yes. Wow, kinda gross if you think about it. Okay, wait a sec. Did you say hair? Hagakure asked in bewilderment. Why hair? Izuku nodded, feeling a bit insecure despite having bested Todoroki with his plan. And he knew it was gross for himself. Thank you, Zero. Well, it has to do with my first super move. I need a costume that can adapt alongside with me if I want to use it. And it was actually easier than I thought. Yui has a contract with a hairdresser who has a hair elongation quirk. Since that hair contains my own DNA, it is able to react on matter adaptation. Wow, you sure put some thought into that. Ashido stated. Makes me sorta jealous. She grinned infectiously. Still, you were totally awesome out there. Was the whole thing your plan? No, Tokoyami also helped me a great deal. I merely polished the weapon you forged, Midoriya-san. No one shall judge you for taking the credit you deserve. Deku had slowly adapted plastic in his eyes, which didn't look creepy at all, so Katsuki waited eagerly how long he'd stand the gaff before the praise melted his brain. Sadly, Ponytail saved him by continuing with her analysis. As I stated, the clue to his success laid in the special feature of his costume. Midoriya-san sacrificed a small part of his body mass, likely fat or hair cells, and a tiny sample of metal which helped that part to maintain the adaptation during what I assume was his super move. Cut the shit, Katsuki snapped. They don't have a clue anyways. Ponytail looked at him in what could be interpreted as annoyance before explaining. Midoriya-san seems to be able to adapt liquids. What? Katsuki rolled his eyes. That exaggerated reaction was starting to become ridiculous. Seriously, they lived in a world where weird Mouserat bear things became principles and humans could look like washing machines, and they got excited about this? As far as I am concerned, Midoriya-san probably transformed part of his body into water. When Hagakure's punch hit him, he quickly transformed the water surrounding her hand into metal, making her visible to him. Okay, that's just plain unfair. Liquids? Really? How are we supposed to stand up against that? Quit the crying, Kaminari. I also wanted to point out that we are over 1,000 words into this chapter and still don't know where the bomb is. Ribbit. Everyone looked at Azui in confusion. Let's just pretend you never said that, alright? If it's necessary. Ribbit. Yaoyorozu nodded. To be honest, I don't know where they deposited the bomb either. The only thing I can say is that it wasn't in the room when Todoroki entered. Thanks, young Yaoyorozu. In this case, does anyone else have a clue? Peaceable headshaking followed. Well, since I don't know either, how about our villain team explains it themselves? He just boldly stated that he doesn't have a clue. Tokumi sighed as Izuku had started to freeze completely while unleashing a small mumble storm, and explained, as we could not exclude the possibility of the heroes besting us, we braced ourselves. For that purpose, my quirk, Dark Shadow, hid away the object of our nefarious goal in a chamber upstairs. Hereupon we concealed the lair in which I awaited Todoroki-san, whose thoughts it never entered that the bomb might be without guard. Okay, what? That's over my head. What did he just say? After Todoroki-san's first attack, he put the bomb on the 4th floor. Then he darkened the room, so Todoroki-san didn't notice its absence, and then Dark Shadow took a shape which made it appear like it was enveloped in it. Yaoyorozu explained. Great, so why didn't he just say it like that? Now that you all know how the fight could end like it did, who do you think was the MVP in this battle? Well, Midoriya-san, I'd say. It was his plan, right? Ojiro stated. What? Sato objected. Don't you think it was Todoroki-san? He stood his ground against Midoriya-san and Tokoyama-san at the same time. Though you have to keep in mind it was Todoroki-san's misplanning that led to the whole situation in the first place, Azui pondered. And Tokoyama-san let himself be captured because he knew the time was almost up. Yeah, Mineta chimed in, but Hagakure-chan was the only one who actually tried her best in this, right? I mean, the other three were way more careless than she was. And I still say it was Midoriya-san's plan. Todoroki-san's strength. Tokoyama-san's foresight. Hagakure's brayas, taking concentration. Mineta shrank under the glares he received from those around him. It seems we have a disagreement. In this case, it was Tokoyama-san, Yaoyorozu stated. She interrupted All Might. How did you come to that conclusion? Simple, Yaoyorozu said, and somehow it really sounded like it was simple when she said it. Todoroki-san was careless. He didn't take the training as seriously as he should have, and played into the villain team's hands. Todoroki just looked at her again, impassive. Hagakure-san's performance was really good. She realized Todoroki-san's mistake with the ice coating almost immediately and tried to plan in advance. But she failed to recognize the villain team's strategy of dividing them and instead tried to fight Midoriya-san, who, in terms of hand-to-hand combat, was obviously superior to her. Hagakure rubbed the back of her head in embarrassment. Yeah, that was kinda dumb. Midoriya-san could have won with far more elegant tactics than the one he used. I assumed that he wanted to test his manacle technique, which is effective, but takes a toll on his body. After that, he was too weakened to break through the ice wall Todoroki-san had created. Tokoyama-san, on the other hand, played to his strengths and occupied Todoroki-san to an extent that actually that was part of the plan. Yaoyorozu looked at Midoriya-san in surprise. Excuse me? Well, Izuku explained self-consciously. In case Tokoyama-san got incapacitated before the time was up, my job would have been to get to the bomb and defend it. We didn't know how strong he was, after all, and didn't want to risk him incapacitating us both, which is why I stayed outside. Also, had I destroyed the ice wall, I might have injured Tokoyama-san or Todoroki-san. Everyone gawked at him in shock. That's how far you planned ahead. Sato marveled. That's crazy. Well, in this case, the MVP badge goes to HM. All Might hesitated. Well, it goes to... Hurry up already. All Might sighed. It probably goes to young Hagakure. What? Me? But I didn't do anything. I was just no match for Izuku-kun. Hagakure looked at him he couldn't place it. Invisible and all. True. Young Midoriya was indeed more powerful than you. But this exercise is not a strength ranking. An MVP means most valuable player. I will be frank. Young Todoroki, young Midoriya, and young Tokoyami are all superior to you in terms of strength. That was what young Yaoyorozu was getting at. The girl nodded slowly, her confusion now obvious even without visible features. But instead of just relying on your teammate, you tried to devise a strategy on your own after you realized that young Todoroki did not take you seriously. All Might looked at the latter sternly, who just returned the gaze with cold anger burning in his eyes. This might evolve into a problem later on, but for now he'd focus on young Hagakure. And if his teammate had been someone else, they both would have been incapacitated short after entering the building. Young Midoriya had the surprise effect and greater agility, which he proved in his fight against young Todoroki later on. So I dare say you were the one who exploited their potential the most, ensuring your team had the chance to win. Hagakure seemed overjoyed, considering the speed her arms flailed up and down while she talked to the flustered Midoriya, while Tokoyami nodded in approval. Oh, Izuku-kun. Yais. First name basis? Cat can help. Of course Katsuki just stood there and watched, with a shy-teating smirk on his face. Could you please take off that manacle now? Match 2. Kota Koji and Ojiro Mashireo as the villains versus Kaminari Denki and Bakugo Katsuki as the heroes. Man, Bakugo. Cool that we two are a team. You sure rock. This is totally like that one show where Katsuki was really close to losing himself and blasting his idiot of a partner into the stratosphere because he didn't know when to shut the fuck up. Then he thought of all the hours he and Deku had spent discussing scenarios and making plans, and calmed down again. Wouldn't do if he lost after actually praising Deku. Invisible Kaken. Hagakure wouldn't let him forget that ever again. Wait. Did he actually develop an inner Deku? Fuck, 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 fuck. Let loose that grenade, and then they just went boom. Oh yeah, speaking of grenades, what features does your costume have? Mine has two really cool staffs that carry electricity, and also this neat headgear. My clothes are insulated, so I can protect civilians with them. I also... Katsuki was on the verge of facepalming. Again. Instead, he gave a smile and painted a rosy picture of him ripping off Dunt's face, head, and shoving it up his ass. Start. Life was beautiful. Katsuki charged straight in, having Dunt's face follow him while wailing about him being uncooperative. Boy, Sparky, here's a plan, so try to not fuck it up. Can you discharge electricity through the braces? Wait, you actually have a strategy? You seem more like the boom, die, hua 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 type, you know? Fucker, can you do that or not? If not, at least shut the fuck up. Yeah, that's what I meant. But I can try. Wait a minute. Dunt's face laid his palm on the brace and, yeah, works. All right, now use that shitty head widget and hack the other team's communication. Dunt's face looked at him in awe. Bakugo loved it when people did that. Even those like that one. Okay, I got an idea. With that, Dunt's face fiddled with his headgear, listened for a while, and then inhaled. That didn't bode well. What the fuck? Hey, villains. Greetings from me, the electric hero, Center Shock. I just wanted to inform you that it was quite nice of you to let us hear your plans over the funk. Toodles. That idiot. That was actually a decent idea, now that Katsuki thought about it. Psychological warfare and all that. Still, Center Shock? Really? Okay, the bomb is on the 4th floor. Oh well. Dunt's face wasn't completely useless, Katsuki guessed. All right, you stay here. When I give the signal, you send a shock through the braces. Dunt's face nodded. A feral grin spread over Katsuki's face as he propelled himself upstairs. On the 4th floor, Ojiro was exceedingly nervous. Not only did he get the violent Bakugo as an opponent, but there was also the problem that Koda's quirk wasn't of much use in a cityscape. Not to mention that Bakugo was definitely in the top 5 of the class judging by what he'd done at the quirk apprehension test and the entrance exam. Hey, villains. Greetings from me, the electric hero, Center Shock. What? I just wanted to inform you that it was quite nice of you to let us hear your plans over the funk. Toodles. Shit. This was really bad. That message basically meant that Kaminari had a method to intercept their communication system. Ojiro cursed under his breath. Then the explosions came near, and he quickly hid himself by wrapping his tail around a strut on the ceiling. At least the environment was to his advantage. The second he was in hiding, a demon disguised as a human shot out of the staircase, propelled by little explosions and rocketing forward. His speed was impressive, but Ojiro was quick to follow. In the moment Bakugo had to slow down in order to open the door at the end of the corridor, he silently leapt down and aimed a heavy hit at his head. Unfortunately, it didn't land. Bakugo shot around, faster than Ojiro expected anyone to be, and met his tail with an explosion that shot him down the floor. All right, monkey, let's see what you got. Better give fucking everything if you want to be more than just a warm-up for me. Ojiro adopted a fighting stance, filled with determination. Prodigy or not, he'd show him that he, too, had his pride. Bakugo rocketed towards him, an explosion already at hand. Ojiro readily intercepted him with a palm strike to the arm and swept the other boy's legs with his tail. However, Bakugo jumped over it, propelled himself behind Ojiro, and blasted him in the back. Ojiro rolled over, leaped back to his feet, and decided to change his tactics. The tailed boy jumped up to the ceiling again, clung onto a strut, and started to swing around the beams, effortlessly dodging Bakugo's explosions. Here you got it, Bakugo. This is what monkeys do. Bakugo smirked. Instantly, Ojiro knew something was off. The older boy seemed to adjust his grenade-themed little bracers before leveling his right arm at him. Dunt's face. Now. Then Ojiro screamed with pain as an electric shock shot through him, causing him to lose his grip. As he fell, he could hear Bakugo screaming Warhead Panzerfaust. Then everything went black. Target building, basement monitor room. Everyone stared reverently at how fast the second match had concluded. Bakugo's blast had checkmated Ojiro as well as broken and hurled the door into Koda, who'd been caught off guard and knocked out. That was brilliant. He took out both villains with a single attack. Zero said while the 4 participants of the second fight came in, Ojiro still a bit fuzzy. Yeah, Ashido agreed enthusiastically. Didn't he put the bomb at risk with it, though? Actually, no, Yaoyorozu explained. His blast was only strong enough to affect the door. If Koda hadn't stood in line, he wouldn't have been harmed. Otherwise, the explosion could have led to serious injuries for Ojiro. She is right. Young Bakugo demonstrated outstanding competence and proficiency with his quirk as well as a quick wit. He used both his own capabilities and the specialties of his partner to the fullest, and is definitely the MVP of the second match. Katsuki couldn't help but smirk at Deku, who looked at him in mock sulkiness. 3 seconds later, they began discussing the tank's utility and how to improve it. Match 3. Yaoyorozu Momo and Mineta Minoru as the villains versus Sato Rikido and Ishido Mina as the heroes. As soon as All Might had made the signal, Mina rushed into the building with enthusiasm. Finally, she'd catch a glimpse of the real hero training herself. Though she probably wouldn't be able to top those insane strength demonstrations of the first 2 rounds. Well, whatever. She'd give her best nonetheless. Come on, Sato. We gotta rush. The longer we wait, the more difficult it'll be, right? They're both trappers, after all. Take it easy. Sato tried to curb her. I'll just have to get my strength boost ready. With that, he opened a box of candy and threw 3 of them into his mouth. Mina quickly snatched one, too. So tasty, she exclaimed in delight. Did you make them yourself? Sato nodded sheepishly. All right, I know who I'm going to call at my birthday. At the second floor. What exactly do you think this is going to accomplish? Would you be so kind and stay focused? Mineta looked at her with as much innocence as he could muster, which wasn't much at all. What do you mean? Yaoyorozu pinched her nasal bridge. Please, Mineta, do you want to lose because you didn't even try to control yourself? You won't endear yourself to your classmates at all with that attitude. At the basement monitor room. Did that little squirt just? Jiro seethed. It looks like it, Ida stated. But we shouldn't be prejudiced. It could have been an accident. Nah, I don't know. Kaminari looked at the screen with somewhat of a glassy look in his eyes. Get a hold on yourself, dunce face. Kakin. It's Kaminari. Kaminari Denki. What did I even do to you? Kaminari wailed. Hey, look, Zero stated. It seems like they started to prepare themselves. Okay, wait, what's that? At a room on the first floor. Whoa, Mina exclaimed. Look at this. In the back of the room was the bomb, and the floor was cluttered with suspicious-looking violet orbs. Mina could barely dodge when suddenly Mineta lunged out from behind the bomb and started pelting them with even more of the orbs, the effect of which Mina had already seen at the quirk apprehension test. But on the bright side, Yaoyorozu wasn't here, and Mina was pretty sure the 2 of them could subdue their pint-sized opponent. So she veered to the right, sliding on her acid and melting through the orbs, to Mineta's horror, while Sato had to get by with just carefully avoiding the sticky things. Luckily, Mineta, while being a decent shot, was unable to trap Mina due to her speed and stayed strangely focused on her, which, to be honest, made her kind of uncomfortable. It didn't take long at all before Sato jumped over the ball minefield with sugar-enhanced strength. Mineta let out a shriek and used the spheres to jump away from him, which led to Sato reaching the bomb effortlessly. Mina laughed merrily as Sato had it secured, simultaneously feeling somewhat disappointed that a team with a recommendation student hadn't managed a better performance than this. Then, the door slammed shut. Now Mina was annoyed. Was Mineta really petty enough to lock them in? Ashido-san. Sato sounded worried. That in turn made her nervous, too. Wasn't the bomb supposed to be made of styrofoam? Mina nodded. Yeah? So what? Sato squeezed the bomb, which crumpled and then slowly returned to its original form. A fake? They planted a fake bomb in the room? Mina felt betrayed. A fake? How had they, of course? Yaoyorozu had created an inflatable bomb. They brought it in here. Mineta littered the ground with sticky orbs, and… oh no! Sadakin, look at the windows. Sato, whose sugar rush slowly began to take a toll on him, turned around and could do nothing but watch as from above a purple liquid poured over the glass. At the same time, the liquid flowed towards them from underneath the door. Yeah, what is this? Sato used the fake bomb to touch the liquid, to which it stuck. Could it be that this stuff is made of Minetaken's hair? They were screwed. Wait, there was one option they had left. Sadakin, I'll melt a hole through the floor. We're going to run a surprise attack while they think they got us. Sato looked at the purple goo hesitantly. That could work, I guess. But make it quick. This stuff just doesn't stop coming. Mina nodded and released her strongest acid through the soles of her feet, painting a small, sizzling cycle on the floor, which gave in soon after. All right, the hole's done. Now come on. Both of them leaped down to the floor below, where 4 cannons were directed at them. Yaoyorozu, who seemed quite proud with her accomplishment, smiled at them with the beauty of a mushroom cloud. Sato and Mina were quick to yield. Match 4. Shiro Hanta and Uraraka Achiko as the villains versus Aoyama Yuga and Ida Tenya as the heroes. Ida was a systematic and meticulous person. Since the previous teams had lost due to underestimating their opponents, he made sure to take the threat seriously. This included thoroughly checking every room in the ground floor before moving up to the next stage. His partner, Aoyama, stayed in the main corridor of the stage they were frisking to ensure their opponents wouldn't be able to ambush them. However, when they arrived at the 4th floor of the 5-floor building without enemy contact, Ida became suspicious. They'd already lost around 6 minutes with sweeping the stories, which meant that slowly but surely their time got low. After them being halfway through the 5th floor, and Ida, now definitely confused, Aoyama spoke up. Monsieur Ida, it seems like our meprisable opponents entrenched themselves up on the roof. Aoyama pointed up to the skylight, which had been covered in layers upon layers of tape. Well, that Ida called cunning. As expected of those wrenched scoundrels. Let us enforce justice on them with all our might. Oui, monsieur. Aoyama bowed flamboyantly before shooting a laser out of his shoulder bracer, cutting through glass and tape with ease. The path is cleared. Ida swiftly got a table from the interior of a nearby room, thus creating a makeshift platform. Since the villain team would have been alerted by Aoyama's laser either way, he didn't have to worry about subtlety. The main problem was that their opponents knew from where to expect them, so Ida had an idea. Aoyama, is it possible for you to use your naval laser to propel yourself through the roof hatch? Seiyunju d'enfant. Aoyama lied down on the table. Luckily, the building's skylights were quite big, so at least he wouldn't have many problems with getting on the roof. Aoyama rather inelegantly flew through the roof hatch, Ida following immediately after, though he had to resort to climbing, only to be met with a slap to his armor. At first he was confused, but then he understood. Uraraka's quirk. Of course, she'd applied zero gravity to him. And like the name said, he now floated through the air aimlessly. Okay, Sarakin. I got Idakin. The other boy nodded and quickly tried to seize Aoyama with his tape. The sparkling boy, though, proved himself as quite the good matchup against the two of them. His laser beams actually managed to hold Uraraka, who was only useful at close combat, and Shiro's tape, which he cut through easily, at bay. Ida, on the other hand, had been disabled before the fight had even begun, and to make matters worse, he couldn't see the bomb anywhere on the roof. Then his brain suddenly produced a concept. This might work. At the basement monitor room. Looks sorta bad for the hero team, don't you think so? I mean, no offense, but how long do you think Aoyamakin's gonna be able to keep this up? Hagakure stated. Also, is it just me, or is Uraraka-san's quirk just plain unfair in this terrain? Yeah, you're right. Makes me even more pumped up to be next, though. And you have to admit that it's damn manly to keep Uraraka-kin and Sarakin covered simultaneously. Could you brain-fucked idiots put your mind in gear before? Midoriya activated his dark aura of Kakin. All right, may I kindly pronounce my opinion with regard to the fact that you are all imbeciles? I mean, Four Eyes is obviously up to something. So how about you just hang tight and watch? At the roof of Training Building 4. Ida made a mental note to thank Tensei for his advice when it came to movement in difficult terrain. Though he had argued that presumably a fight in weightlessness was unlikely to ever happen, his brother had reasonably brought forward the argument that it never did any harm to be prepared. Ida was glad he had taken that to heart. So when he was sure that Uraraka and Shiro were fully focused on Aoyama, who seemed to feel the repercussions of his quirk by now, but his dedication was most admirable, Ida stretched his legs nearly into a split and slowly moved forward in first gear. In the meantime, Achiko was getting increasingly weary. While Aoyama was arguably weaker than, say, Yaoyorozu or Tokoyami, his quirk proved to give him a serious edge against the two of them, and she just wasn't able to close in on him. She briefly considered making herself float to get to him, but decided against it. He had these pauldrons, so that move would probably make her an easy target. Consequently, she had to do it by conventional methods, and Aoyama seemed to slowly wear out in this two-known fight. Shiro shot another round of tape that was cut off by Aoyama's laser beams, shredding the tape into ribbons that fluttered through the air and forced her to dance around them as she attacked. Shiro's attacks grew slower and unfocused, whereas Aoyama had taken to clutching his stomach. Both were definitely giving into exhaustion, so Achiko got ready. Then she heard something behind herself. She barely had time to turn around when, wham! When Ida's engine-powered kick sent her across the rooftop, her concentration collapsed, leading to her releasing her quirk. In that moment, three things happened in quick succession. Firstly, Ida, back to being affected by gravity, ran towards Uraraka. Secondly, Aoyama, now suffering from serious stomachache, shot a final beam out of his belt that managed to hit Shiro's left elbow, who hissed in pain but seized the opportunity to wrap his now defenseless opponent in tape out of his right one. And thirdly, the bomb suddenly dropped down and fell straight on Aoyama. The bomb has been secured. The hero team wins. At the basement monitor room. Wow, that was sick, Ashido exclaimed. I mean, did you see that? Idakin totally rocked. His movement in Zerog was sort of metal, yeah? Jiro agreed. Could have something to do with Shiro and Uraraka having paid him no attention as soon as he was in it, though. But the securing of the bomb was funny, Kaminari stated. I mean, it just dropped straight on Aoyamakin. To be honest, I feel kinda sorry for him. Styrofoam or not. But wasn't it mainly luck? Azui asked. Uraraka made the bomb float above the field, and in that scenario the consequences would have been pretty bad if it had fallen on the ground. Ribbit. You are right, young Azui. But in hero business, luck is important, too. Quirk advantages, coincidences, natural calamities, etc. In all of these events, luck is vital for the heroes. So while I agree that the outcome of this battle was significantly influenced by happenstance, it won't reflect on their grades. After all, there have been stranger incidences throughout the years. I remember that one event with Ryukyu 3 years ago where she fought a villain while completely covered in raclette cheese. Everyone blinked, and then chose not to ask. Match 5. Jiro Kyoka and Kirishima Ijiro as the heroes versus Azui Tsu and Shoji Mizo as the villains. Ijiro felt pumped up. He had been mesmerized by the previous fights, but now that it was finally his turn, he could hardly wait for the whole thing to start. Also, the quirks of their opponents were suited for direct combat, which made it even better. He knew strategizing was important, but his favorite sort of fight was still an all-out, old-fashioned brawl. Plus, Jiro was super manly. As soon as All Might had announced the start of the battle, she had plugged her earphone jack into a wall and had instantly found out where Shoji and Azui were. She'd also reprimanded him quite dryly that, as Shoji had a surveillance quirk too, he shouldn't burst into the room like a decerebrated punk. Ijiro had agreed, and also reminded himself to look up decerebrated later on. So now they were inside, as quiet as they could possibly be, with one of them being Ijiro, who thought that at least he tried his very best. Jiro checked the position of the enemy team every few seconds, but they didn't seem to move much. As soon as they'd reached the 4th floor, they only whispered to each other, something Kyoka had proposed, though she quickly learned that Kirishima was incredibly bad at whispering. She actually wasn't sure if he was quieter than beforehand at all. All right, they don't talk to each other, though I can hear them moving. They're probably using sign language or something. Ijiro nodded and grinned in excitement. All right, here we go. He hardened his body and threw himself against the door, which gave in without resistance. Ijiro's eyes widened in surprise. Then he had to duck in order to avoid the capture tape Shoji held ready. Quickly, he made a roll to the left, shortly before being wrapped in something sticky and moist. As he was hurled up, he realized the sticky and moist thing had been Ajui's tongue. Ijiro turned while airborne, grabbed the tongue, and pulled with all his might, which resulted in Ajui breaking away from the wall she'd been sticking to. While she was falling down, Jiro activated her own quirk. The effect was overwhelming. As she was standing inside the door, there was only one direction from where one could get at her, and the speakers at her legs covered that pretty effectively, letting out the most ear-shredding, brain-grinding, nerve-burning screech that Ijiro had ever heard. Shoji, who unfortunately still had two of his dupli arms transformed into ears, prostrated quickly, pressed his hands on the sides of his head, and groaned in pain. Ajui had been able to dodge the bulk of it, but appeared dizzy, opening her to a hardened punch that made her stagger back a few paces. Jiro, in the meantime, slowly stepped forward, her boots still emitting the excruciating noise, before calmly wrapping the capture tape around Shoji's arm. Hero Team, Shoji, captured. Ajui leaped out of the way when Jiro directed another sound attack at her, before avoiding Ijiro's flurry of blows narrowly. She then stuck to the ceiling, snatched his ankle, not again, and flung him straight into Jiro, who was forced to cut her attack in order to not injure her teammate, before being toppled over by said teammate. Ajui jumped towards them while Ijiro hurried to get away from Jiro, who was still slightly dazed. Had it not been for his intervention, Ajui's follow-up kick would likely have knocked her out. Instead, he pulled her away as the frog girl descended, who instantaneously used her tongue like a whip to slap her out of his hands. Kirishima had to respect that girl's strength and speed. The latter especially. He just couldn't land a clean hit on her because she was so damn agile. Kirishima was delighted. This was how he'd imagined battle training going. As soon as Jiro had cleared her head again, Ajui was on the defensive. While her skill and flexibility were great, she just stood little chance against the two of them at the same time, with the bomb still behind her. Which didn't mean that she'd ceased in her efforts, because she hadn't. Instead, she pulled out all the stops, resorting to throwing the room's furniture at them with a surprisingly high rate and occupying the two of them for quite a while. Finally, though, Jiro managed to overcome Ajui's barrage and got to the bomb. The bomb was secured. The hero team, Wyans. At last, the chapter is over. Ribbit.